Voices for Justice is a podcast that uses adult language and discusses sensitive and potentially triggering topics, including violence, abuse, and murder. This podcast may not be appropriate for younger audiences. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Some names have been changed or omitted per their request or for safety purposes. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Turney, and this is Voices for Justice. Today I am covering a case from 1991 that absolutely shook Austin, Texas to its core when Sergeant John Jones got the call that the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop was on fire, and soon discovered the bodies of 4 teenage girls inside. Their cases were collectively coined the Yogurt Shop Murders, and it's one of the most notorious and puzzling cases from Austin to this day. These cases are complicated and tragic. There is a large list of witnesses and a large list of suspects. There's a lot of bad police work, there are multiple confessions, overturned convictions, and DNA that still needs further testing. But most importantly, there are 4 victims and 3 families that have been waiting a long time for justice. This is going to be a very detailed deep dive being told in multiple parts. So let's get into it because we have a lot to cover. The 4 victims in this case are 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, her 15-year-old sister Sarah Harbison, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, and the youngest, 13-year-old Amy Ayers. Let's start with some background on the victims, beginning with Sarah and Jennifer Harbison. Their parents, Mike and Barbara, were high school sweethearts, and they later married. They were originally from New Boston in East Texas near the Arkansas border, but they later settled in Austin so Mike could enroll in divinity courses to pursue his graduate degree. The deal was that Mike would go back to school while Barbara worked, and once he graduated, they would all move back to New Boston. But Barbara really liked Austin, and she thought that she and her daughters would have more opportunities and an overall better quality of life there. So when Sarah was 2.5 and Jennifer was 5, she took the kids and moved back to Austin. Barbara had the girls pretty young, and she would be described as being more like a sister to them than a mother. She would later meet and marry a man named Frank Sirachi in 1980. They lived a very quiet but fulfilling life, with Frank working as a technician for Dell Computers and Barbara working as a credit officer at Team Bank. For most of their lives, Sarah and Jennifer attended a Catholic private school, but they asked to go to a public school for their high school years. In 1990, the family would move from a less desirable neighborhood in Austin to what they considered to be a better, safer neighborhood in the northwestern area of the city. And this was just a few miles from Lanier High School where the girls would go to school. Jennifer Harbison began her senior year at Lanier just months before her death and was very popular, social, and outgoing. She actually was a very tiny girl, standing at just 5 feet tall and weighing only 86 pounds. She was also very active, with her mother saying that Jennifer just hated sitting still. She was a relay runner on the varsity track team, and she was the district vice president of the Future Farmers of America, and president of her school's FFA chapter. And a part of being in that program was that you actually had to raise animals, so her and her sister Sarah, who was also a part of the program, were actually raising sheep to show at the annual Austin Livestock Show and Rodeo the following spring. Here are Sarah and Jennifer's parents talking a bit more about their girls.
Jennifer and Sarah shared a passion, FFA, raising sheep.
And the funny thing is, they really just love those animals in the first and second place because they just love them.
We got pictures of them just kissing them on the face and nose to nose with these lambs.
They're so funny. Gosh, they're funny.
Frank and Barbara erected a shrine in their home to honor the girls. The table is littered with pictures and memories. They still do not believe their girls are gone. They know someday the killers will be caught. Do they have any qualms about the death penalty?
Not at all. Not at all. As long as it's slow and painful, and they're scared and they suffer.
Yeah, because he scared my baby girls. Those people scared my baby girls, and my baby girls would not have hurt anyone. ever.
I think God would give us this one. I think He would give us this one.
Sarah Harbison was only a few months into her sophomore year at Lanier High School. But it seems that, like her big sister Jennifer, Sarah also enjoyed staying busy. Because in addition to her being in the FFA, she also played volleyball and basketball. Here are Sarah's parents describing a bit more about her specifically.
When she played with St. Louis, her claim to fame was not her scoring, but that she fouled out every game.
She was a cheerleader in the 8th grade, so she would go to a ball game and the girls would play, and then she'd run back into the locker rooms and change into a cheerleading outfit and come out and cheer for the boys' game.
Which was okay, unless it was tournament time. And then she would play, cheer, play, cheer.
Sarah also had a new boyfriend of just about 3 weeks who had given her his senior ring. It was gold with his initials on one side, a tractor on the other, and a green stone in the middle. Sarah would wear this ring on the night of her death, putting it next to her Mickey Mouse watch on a pile of clothing found near her body. But she would never take off her gold cross necklace. Sarah's best friend was Amy Ayers, the youngest of all 4 girls. Amy was born in Johnson County, Texas, to her parents Pamela and Bob, and she had an older brother named Sean. The family has been described as quiet, reserved, and religious. Amy spent a lot of time on their family ranch and had been riding horses since she was 3 years old. Her father has stated that she could ride from sunup until sundown without getting tired or bored. Amy was also known to put leashes on pigs and take them for walks. When reporters asked her father if she was a cowgirl, he responded, "No, she's all cowgirl." When she grew up, she wanted to be a veterinarian, and Amy's biggest crush was George Strait, whose posters were plastered all over the walls of her bedroom. Here are her parents describing a little bit more about Amy.
Used to kind of bother her because she was always a country girl, and I told her, I said, you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl.
What does this room reflect of her?
Well, I think it shows you some of her interests. George Strait, he's on every wall here in the room. She was an animal lover. She really loved cats, and horses were probably her favorite of the animals. We've got stuffed animals of all kinds to go with that. She spent a lot of time in here just by herself, played her stereo with all of her country western music. She's always liked country western. Has never been a rock and roll fan. And would spend, do her homework in here sitting at her desk with her country music going.
By 1985, the family moved to Austin. In 1991, Amy was still in the 8th grade, but she planned on attending Lanier High School the next year. And after some encouragement from her older brother Sean, who was already in the FFA, she was accepted into the program as a junior member. And Amy did extremely well. She was actually quickly nominated to be the vice president of the chapter. This is where Amy met her new best friend, Sarah Harbison, and her sister, Jennifer.
They just hit it off from the first time they met, and then once that happened, you didn't see one without the other at the livestock show. You didn't have to worry about those two when they were together. You knew that they were going to have a good time, but you didn't have to worry about what they were going to get into. They were going to be safe in what they did. They had a ball together, laughed and giggled, and really a good time.
This small choice to join the FFA and to befriend Sarah would ultimately result in Amy's untimely death. The 4th victim was Eliza Thomas. Eliza was a beautiful brunette born to her parents James and Maria in Austin, Texas. A few years later, her sister Sonora was born, but by the time Eliza was 7, her parents divorced. Her parents shared custody of Eliza and Sonora until Eliza turned 14, when she could decide who she ultimately wanted to live with. Initially, she'd stay with her father, but in July of 1991, Eliza moved in with her mother while Sonora stayed behind with their father. But the sisters remained close. Eliza's future looked incredibly bright. She was an avid reader with a talent for language, and her parents fully believed that she would have grown up to be a poet or a writer of some kind. But her passion, like the other girls, was animals. She too was in the FFA and would be nominated for Queen like her best friend Jennifer. Her project was a 254-pound pig named Stormy who needed twice daily injections. Eliza took a job at the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop at the Hillside Strip Mall, working nights and weekends, making $4.35 an hour, to supplement another job she had taking a 9-year-old to gym lessons twice a week. Eliza held these jobs for a few reasons. The first being that Eliza had a car that she loved. It was a bright green 1971 VW Carmen Ghia, which she picked because it matched her emerald birthstone. Truth be told, you guys, I know next to nothing about cars. So I googled a 1971 VW Carmen Ghia, and I totally get why she was obsessed. It's very rounded and vintage and just cool looking. It's a car I would have loved to have at the age of 17. And Eliza was extremely mechanically inclined. She did her own repairs, and that year she told her parents that all she wanted for Christmas was car parts. But in addition to paying to keep her car running and in gas, Eliza also worked to not put any additional financial strain on her mother. See, not too long before this, Maria had actually switched career paths and was now making much less money as an artist assistant. Although Eliza loved being in the FFA and cars, she was also kind of a girly girl. In an interview not long after her death, cameras followed her mother Maria into Eliza's untouched bedroom, and they showed her shelves filled with knickknacks and lipsticks, and Maria would describe how Eliza washed her face 3 times a day.
She loved artwork.
Her mother Maria and sister Sonora have left Eliza's room much the same way Eliza left it.
She loved tiny little knickknacks, and as you can see, there's lipsticks there, and she's got tons and tons more. She used to love, she had the most beautiful mouth, you know, so she would always, I would buy her lots of lipsticks, and she would buy lots of lipstick.
Eliza was fanatic about her complexion. She would wash her face 2 or 3 times a day.
She always put her hair way up, you know, and then she'd have clips and then wash her face real good at night, and I can just still see her doing it.
I've seen that Eliza wanted to be a veterinarian and that she wanted to be a model. Honestly, she probably could have done both. She was beautiful, bright, and determined. Eliza Thomas could have been whatever she wanted had her life not been cut so short. Following their deaths, countless newspaper articles would focus on just how unimaginable it was for something so horrific to happen in the Austin community, especially to these girls. These 4 girls that loved country music, animals, and their community. These 4 good girls. See, back in 1991, Austin still very much felt like a small town. Despite having a population of about 600,000, violent crime was low and people still trusted each other. But all of that changed after December 6, 1991, as countless newspapers reported on the innocence that was lost that night, the paranoia that spread through the community, and how terrified Austin should be since there was at least one brutal killer still on the loose. On the morning of Friday, December 6, 1991, Jennifer and Sarah Harbison drove in Jennifer's brand new dark blue Chevy S10 pickup to take care of their sheep that were being held in a barn on donated land about 3 miles from Lanier High School, just like they did every morning and every afternoon. So, after taking care of the sheep, Sarah and Jennifer returned home to shower and went to school. After school, Jennifer gives Sarah's boyfriend a ride home, and they stop back at the barn for their final visit of the day. Eliza Thomas would also visit the barn that morning and presumably that afternoon to give her pig Stormy one of his 2 required daily injections. And Amy Ayers would attend her middle school like normal that day. Jennifer then dropped Sarah off at home and drove over to her boyfriend Sammy's apartment where he lived with his mother. Sammy actually missed school that day in order to attend his grandfather's funeral, so Jennifer really wanted to see him and to make sure that he was okay. Jennifer and Sammy often talked about their dreams that Sammy would get a basketball scholarship at a college that Jennifer could also attend, and that after graduation they could get married, have a family, and spend the rest of their lives together. But in addition to seeing Sammy, Jennifer also had plans to grab her wallet that she'd left at a friend's house and go back to school to fill out an application to run for FFA Queen after being nominated. She planned to be back home around 7 p.m. to get ready for her 8 p.m. shift at the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop at the Hillside Strip Mall. See, a part of the deal with Jennifer having a brand new truck was that she would help her father, Mike Harbison, make the payments. She also had to agree to take her little sister Sarah wherever she wanted to go, and her friend Eliza Thomas, who had been working at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop for months, told her to come work with her. After all, it was pretty easy and fun, and they would get to hang out even more than they already did. It seemed like a no-brainer, so Jennifer began working weekends at the shop. Around 4:30 p.m., Barbara remembers coming home from her job at Team Bank and seeing her daughter Sarah sitting on the couch peeling an orange. Sarah was in a very good mood because not only had her boyfriend just given her his senior ring, but she was excited for the weekend because she didn't have volleyball or basketball practice. So she told her mom that she had plans to go out that night to North Cross Mall. See, North Cross Mall was the place to be as a teenager in Austin in the early 90s. It had all of your mall staples, including an amazing food court, a movie theater, and even the only ice skating rink within 200 miles. In the 1970s, the mall was this premier luxury shopping center in Austin, even with former First Lady Lady Bird Johnson making an appearance at the mall. But by 1991, a lot of the higher-end stores closed. And the mall became a haven for teenagers, with the movie theater even catering to this new audience with midnight showings of heavy metal, Pink Floyd's The Wall, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show, complete with a shadow cast to perform along with the movie. One thing I want to note right here is the alternative scene in Austin, because it will become relevant further along in the case. See, around this time, there was kind of an explosion in goth culture. And Austin police would commonly call any person that fit this goth description a pib, or person in black. If you had an unnatural hair color, wore black, or really anything considered alternative, you were deemed a pib. And around this time, the world was very much experiencing something that was often coined as satanic panic, where anyone who could be described as a pib or goth was instantly a terrible, scary Satan worshiper. And thus on the radar of police when terrible things happened, such as 4 girls being murdered. So keep that in mind as we go further into the case. But back to Sarah and the mall. The idea was that when Jennifer came back to get ready for work, she could take Sarah to pick up Amy from her house, then drop both girls off at the mall before her shift at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. This would actually be the first time that either Sarah or Amy would go to the mall without being accompanied by their parents. But figuring they'd only be there for about 2 hours, Barbara didn't see any harm in letting the girls go. Around 9, when the mall closed, Jennifer would use her break to pick them back up and bring them back to the yogurt shop. That way, they could help Jennifer and Eliza close up the shop around 11, and then Jennifer would take both Sarah and Amy back to her house so Amy could spend the night. At this point, we're about 7 hours away from the fire. So let's break down the timeline. Around 6:30 p.m., Eliza Thomas got home, changed into her I Can't Believe It's Yogurt uniform of a white branded polo, dark jeans, and white Reeboks. She put her hair in a scrunchie, and she was out the door. Like Sarah Harbison, Eliza was also in a good mood that day because her and Jennifer had both been nominated for FFA Queen. But she was a little nervous about her shift. See, the night before, she'd actually covered another girl's shift at the yogurt shop. And she got a prank call from her ex-boyfriend Roger Carduca's friend who thought it would be clever to call the shop and ask about all the yogurt flavors, while Roger laughed hysterically in the background. But Eliza got to the yogurt shop on time at 7 p.m. to start her shift and just had to hope that it didn't happen again. Following the very strict policies and procedures set by Bryce Foods, the parent company of I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, when Eliza entered the shop, she grabbed the keys from the top of the cash register and headed to the back of the shop to unlock the office door to put down her personal items. Then she locked the office door and put the keys back on top of the cash register. Soon after, the girl Eliza was working with finished her shift and left Eliza alone to run the store by herself until Jennifer got there at 8. As Eliza is starting her shift around 7, this is when Jennifer gets home and learns about this plan that Sarah and her mother put together for Jennifer to get her sister and Amy to and from the mall. So Jennifer agrees, not really having any other choice since she made that agreement with her father, and she quickly changes into her uniform of dark jeans, a white I can't believe it's yogurt polo, and her chosen athletic shoes, black high-top Reeboks. She also had on her black Timex watch that she always wore to make sure that she stayed on schedule. And Sarah wears a black denim jacket with a lightning bolt on the front. So Jennifer and Sarah go grab Amy, who is wearing her brother's leather bomber jacket, turquoise jeans, string friendship bracelets that never left her wrist, and a belt with a heart-shaped buckle on it. Amy also brings her Jiminy Cricket overnight bag and leaves it in the truck when Jennifer drops them off at the mall. From the North Cross Mall, Jennifer then heads to the Hillside Strip Mall to the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop to begin her shift at 8 p.m. Eliza would work the cash register and Jennifer would handle the counter. Like the North Cross Mall, the Hillside Strip Mall was also a pretty popular destination. But by this time, only 3 businesses were open: Mr. Gotti's Pizza, the Sun Harvest grocery store, and the yogurt shop. But they still received a decent amount of traffic. Between 8:15 and 8:30, 51-year-old Lucella Jones came into the shop noticing only 2 other cars in the parking lot, Jennifer and Eliza's. She also noticed 2 teenage boys sitting at the booth closest to the door. She said that they were possibly Hispanic, possibly white, and between 14 and 17 years old. And she described them as kind of looking like hippies. But she admits that she didn't really get a good look at their faces because they were kind of facing away from her. And they were apparently fixated on something she described as a small sack on the table that sounded like there were keys or marbles or something inside of it when they moved it. Lucella would later tell investigators that she wanted to ask the girls if they were okay working alone that late at night. But she saw that Eliza and Jennifer were talking and laughing, so she ignored that instinct and figured that they were probably fine. So she ordered a strawberry sundae to go for her husband and she left. Around 9, Jennifer used her break to pick up Sarah and Amy from the mall. When they got back, Jennifer went back to work and Sarah and Amy went to Mr. Gotti's to grab a pizza before they closed at 10. At about 9:30, Eliza's mother stopped by the shop to check on Eliza like she often did. But when she got there, Eliza was on the phone with her younger sister Sonora trying to convince her to ride her bike up to the shop to hang out. But Sonora was home alone and didn't want to leave without her father's permission, so she just stayed home. Eliza then hands the phone to her mom and gets back to work. Maria would later tell investigators that it was shortly after this that she saw 2 girls that were most likely Sarah and Amy come in the door with a pizza and sit down at a booth to eat. Other customers would also vaguely remember seeing 2 girls eating pizza in the shop that night as well. After Maria gets off the phone, the shop gets a call from Jennifer's boyfriend Sammy confirming their breakfast plans for the next morning. Between 9:30 and 10, 52-year-old Daryl Croft entered the yogurt shop. Daryl was an ex-military police officer, and he owned his own security company. So he was used to instantly evaluating situations and kind of just being more observant than most. He also knew Maria and Eliza because they all went to the same gym. Daryl says that he remembers seeing Maria by the cash register, a boy and a girl in a booth, and another couple close to the counter looking at the menu. But above all, he remembers a guy standing in line in front of him. Daryl would describe this man as white, young, and fidgety. Probably in his early to mid-20s, 5'10" to 6 feet tall, and about 155 pounds. He was also wearing a green military-style jacket. Daryl actually parked the car he used for his security company out front, and it happened to have a row of lights across the top. After kind of stalling in line, possibly being unsure of what he wanted to order, this guy in line turned to Daryl and asked if that was his car and what he was. Was he security or was he the police? Daryl confirms that yes, it was his car, and he explains that he owns a security company. And the man just kind of nervously turned back around. But Daryl continues to watch this man closely, saying that he just had a weird feeling about him. So this unknown man in line eventually orders a 7-Up, but Jennifer tells them they only have Sprite, which is fine with him, so Jennifer puts the can of soda in a paper bag and sends him down to Eliza to be rung up. Immediately after this, he asks Eliza to use the bathroom, which meant he kind of had to go around the counter and into the back area of the shop. So Daryl Croft is like, "Whoa, hey Eliza, where is this guy going?" And Eliza just kind of laughs and says that he's using the restroom. Daryl also states that Eliza said something to the effect of that she wasn't really supposed to let people go use the bathroom, but she made an exception because the guy said that he really had to go. However, it's important to note that the restrooms in the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop, both male and female, which were required by city regulations at the time, were actually open to the public. Daryl did try to stick around after paying for his yogurt to get another glimpse of this guy, but he could only stall for so long and finally said his goodbyes to Eliza and Maria and headed towards the door. But he was so preoccupied by this man that when Daryl started to leave, he didn't even grab his yogurt, and Eliza had to yell at him before he left the shop. But Daryl does leave, and a few minutes later so does Maria. Soon after, Eliza's father James and his wife would visit the shop for about 15 to 20 minutes. They would recall speaking to Eliza about her economics class and seeing two girls with a Mr. Gotti's pizza box in a booth, but not much else. Between 9:30 and 10:30, there were reports of more customers coming in and out of the shop. 2 women, a few couples, and regulars Joseph Saunter and Ava Reed, who stopped by at about 10 p.m. They do spend some time talking to Jennifer and Eliza about their FFA projects, but they eventually leave. Another customer would come forward and report that at about 10:30, they saw a man who was possibly white or Hispanic sitting in an older white vehicle in front of the yogurt shop, not really doing anything, but they felt like he seemed suspicious. And another couple at the yogurt shop that night would state that they saw a suspicious-looking van in the parking lot between 10:30 and 11. Now, it's important to note that next to the yogurt shop was a party store. And this store not only shared this attic crawl space area with the yogurt shop, but the office of the party store also shared a wall with the yogurt shop. On Fridays, the party store closed at 7 p.m., but that night, owner Jorge Barney closed down the shop and stayed behind, telling investigators that he was hoping to get ahead of the holiday rush. So he went and got a pizza from Mr. Gotti's, put on reruns of Cheers, and got to work. He would report that at 10:30 p.m. he thought he heard a noise on the roof, so he went outside to check on his Christmas decorations, but found that nothing was wrong. So he kind of just shrugged it off and went back to work. Later in the night, Jorge Barney would be the first to see smoke coming from the yogurt shop. But he wouldn't recall hearing anything. Not even a single one of the 5 gunshots, despite literally being right on the other side of the wall. We are now about 1 hour away from the fire. At 10:42, just 18 minutes before the shop was set to close, Eliza rang up the last sale of the night for Tim Stryker and Margaret Sheehan. They had just seen a movie and wanted to grab some dessert before heading home. The couple reports seeing 2 other customers in this shop, but could only describe them as 2 large people wearing hooded jackets that were sitting across from each other in the booth closest to the cash register. Unfortunately, they couldn't describe much else about these 2 people. Not their genders, not their ethnicities, nothing other than one was larger than the other. And the bigger one was wearing some type of beige-colored hooded jacket that was padded. And the smaller one had light brown hair. But due to their size, they did assume that they were men. This couple states that they saw Eliza behind the counter while Jennifer began closing down the shop, wiping down tables and placing chairs on top of them to clear the floor for mopping. And she was also refilling the napkin dispensers. It's important to note that when investigators examined the shop after the fire, only one booth would still have chairs around it versus on top of it. And that same booth's napkin dispenser was not refilled. Margaret then hears the girls talking about next week's work schedule and a friend they haven't seen in a long time. And she notices that the people in the hooded jackets appeared to be extremely still and quiet, as if they were also listening to the conversation. Margaret really wanted to stay in the shop to eat her yogurt, but they noticed that the girls were obviously trying to clean up for the night and close down the shop, so they decided to give them a break and head out of the store. Margaret believes that was about 5 minutes after entering the store, which puts us at 10:47 p.m. Margaret and Tim didn't report seeing Sarah or Amy in the shop that night, but a Mr. Gotti's pizza box would later be found in the back of the store on a table near the sink. And in and around the sink were the containers from the yogurt toppings, so it's believed that while Jennifer and Eliza were closing down the front of the store, Sarah and Amy were probably sent to the back to work on things like doing the dishes and just cleaning up back there. Now, again, it's important to stress that not only did the yogurt shop have pretty precise protocols in their stores, but Eliza was known for being an absolute stickler for abiding by them, which will actually be pretty helpful in determining what might have happened next. Investigators are pretty sure that after the couple left, Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy were alone in the store with the two unidentified people in the hooded jackets. They believe that 10 minutes prior to closing, Jennifer turned the sign on the front door from open to closed. She then most likely took their single key to lock the door from the inside to ensure that no other customers entered the store while they finished their closing duties, but also allowing for the last two customers to leave if they wanted to. Each night, the employees of the yogurt shop did this with this key. And each night, they would then take the key, lock the store from the outside, and put the key in an envelope and slide it back under the door for the manager the next morning. But the key would still be in the lock on the inside of the door when firefighters later came to put out the fire. After locking the door from the inside, Jennifer then pulled a silver stool over to the yogurt dispensers. That way she could take the tops off for draining and cleaning, which was the next step in the closing process. Investigators and the manager of the shop, familiar with their closing procedures and Eliza and Jennifer's work, believe that Jennifer was close to or behind the cash register with her back to the front door, while Eliza was wiping down the counters when something happened. Something that interrupted the closing procedure. Because at this point, Eliza would abandon the rag on the counter and never go back to pick it up. Just after 11, a teenager going to participate in the midnight showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show would report seeing that the yogurt shop lights were still on. At 11:03 p.m., a no sale would be rung up on the cash register, which means that the cash drawer would open despite there not being an actual transaction. They would later confirm that over $500 was missing from the drawer. At 11:48 p.m., Troy Gay made the first report when he saw fire coming from the Hillside Strip Mall while out patrolling for drunk drivers. When he got closer, he saw Jorge Barney, the owner of the party shop, waving him down at the back of his store. He explained that he'd just seen smoke and opened his back doors to let it out. Officer Gay didn't jump to any conclusions. He figured it was probably just an oven or a stove that had been left on. But the yogurt shop had no stove or oven, and by this time, the windows of the shop were completely black from the smoke, making it impossible to see in. And smoke was beginning to billow out from the surrounding connected businesses. Station 8 of the Austin Fire Department sent out 5 units: an aerial ladder company, an ambulance, an engine company carrying hoses and water, a battalion chief's car, and a victims rescue team. Specialists from the rescue team, Renee Hector Garza and David DeVoe, went in first to try to find the source of the fire. They opened the locked front door with a crowbar, but smoke was just billowing out from the ceiling and still filling the shop. So they got on their hands and knees in hopes of increasing visibility and avoiding as much smoke as possible. Eventually, they got to the back room and stood up. They were able to find the areas on fire and extinguish the flames. They also determined that the hottest area was in the storage room halfway up the south wall. Putting out these fires created a ton of steam in addition to the pre-existing smoke, so visibility was still extremely limited. Of course, the men were in full fire gear, masks included, so they were used to communicating using hand gestures. But DeVoe didn't have a hand gesture for what he saw next, and he ended up tapping his partner, pointing to the ground, and yelling through his mask, quote, "Is that a foot?" End quote. The men were obviously startled and took a step back, which is when they discovered the second body. They reported back to their team that they found 2 victims. They were kids, and they were nude. When they wanted to send in the rescue team, Garza told them not to move the bodies, stating that he knew immediately that something was very wrong. Close to midnight, Sergeant John Jones, the only homicide cop on patrol that night, would get the call about 2 fatalities and a fire at the yogurt shop. He actually had a reporter and a cameraman doing a ride-along with him that night. And after complaining that they weren't seeing enough action and couldn't wait to go to Houston the next day where they'd be sure to see some real crime happen, Jones told them to strap in and get ready. He turned on his lights and sped to the yogurt shop across town. But soon enough, he got another call. they found another body. And just before he got to the scene, another officer would call stating that a fourth body had been discovered.
Jonesy?
Yeah.
You hear about the call 2900 West Anderson?
Yeah, I'm headed over there.
Okay.
I'll meet you out there. 2900. 2900. That's a business.
John?
Go ahead, Wayne.
It's apparently a robbery homicide is 3 fatalities.
Last 10-4. We're en route. Triple fatality. A murder. Oh, great. No, that's a shopping center. Where do I need to come to in here? What place of business is this?
This is the, I can't believe the children. We're running the back, just come around the back here at the wall.
I'll try. Can I get around from the south side? There's a fire hose stretched across Anderson Lane.
The official report would state that the fire started at approximately 11:42 p.m., 39 minutes after the no sale was rung up on the register by Eliza. The back door was found to be unlocked, and the keys that Eliza used to enter the back room before starting her shift were still on top of the cash register. It is believed that whoever killed these girls entered the store from the unlocked back door or were already inside the shop. But investigators are certain that the perpetrators left through the back door. Jennifer, Sarah, Amy, and Eliza were all found in the back of the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop. Investigators believe that they were made to undress at gunpoint and then were bound and gagged. They were shot execution style. Sarah, Jennifer, and Eliza were shot once, and Amy was shot twice. While Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza's bodies were pretty close together near the back door, Amy's body was found further away, closer to the prep table and the restrooms. And she was much less burned than the others. 17-year-old Eliza Thomas was found stacked on top of 15-year-old Sarah Harbison. When investigators found Sarah, her thighs were open, and in between them was an ice cream scoop pointed up towards her pelvis. 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison laid next to Eliza and her sister Sarah, and she sustained the worst burns. Investigators believe that originally she may have been stacked on top of Eliza and Sarah, but that she possibly rolled off during the fire or was pushed off from the high-powered fire hoses. Jennifer had ligature marks on her neck. 13-year-old Amy Ayers was the least burned, but the most battered. She was found with a ligature mark around her neck. She was strangled manually, but not fatally, and she had bruising under her chin from some type of blow. She was shot once on the top left side of her head with a .22 caliber pistol, and again behind her left ear with a .38 caliber pistol. Normally, the protocol in these cases is for the medical examiner to remove the bodies from the scene for further analysis. But because the crime scene had already been destroyed by both the fire and the fire hoses, Sergeant Jones insisted that their remains be processed on the scene before they were moved. His fear was that they would be exposed to possible contamination, or that they would lose any type of trace evidence on the bodies like hairs or fibers. But the medical chief examiner was out of town. So Jones had to deal with Deputy Les Carpenter, who was known for being a stickler for the rules and having a very big ego. He immediately said no to this request. They were his bodies and he would handle it. But after some pushback from Jones and his new partner for this case, Mike Huckabee, that had more seniority than Jones and was a better negotiator, Deputy Medical Examiner Carpenter gave in, but not without protest. While the team processed the bodies of the 4 girls, he stood over them, just being a general pain in the ass, talking down to the Austin Police Department, and repeatedly threatening to load the girls up right then and there. Many suspect that his actions would continue to hinder this investigation in a pretty detrimental way. Most people on the scene that night wished that they'd done things differently. They wished that they'd known that the bodies were there before putting out the fire. They wished the scene was processed differently and better. They'd insist on people wearing booties and keeping a strict log of who was coming and going. But they didn't. It only took a few minutes for news crews to arrive to the scene. But Jones knew he couldn't give away too much to the public just yet, and only gave a very limited statement.
Okay, at 11:47, one of our patrol officers called in to dispatch smoke coming out from, I can't believe it's yogurt. Fire department got here shortly thereafter. What we found in the back there was we found 4 victims. We're handling it as a homicide right now because it appears that one of the victims was struck in the head.
Were the victims together, or were they in different parts of the building?
No, I can't. Can't give you that either.
Were they bound in any way?
Can't give you that.
Was there any sign of forced entry to the building?
Can't give you that.
What can you give?
Just what I gave you. It's still very early in the investigation, okay?
Because Jennifer and Eliza's cars were still in the parking lot and through the process of elimination, the girls were identified quickly. But now the police had to notify the parents. As you can probably imagine, the stories of these parents finding out that their girls were gone are heart-wrenching. Amy Ayer's mother answered the door and immediately feared that her daughter had been sexually assaulted, having no idea that it was so much worse than that. And when Jennifer and Sarah's mother Barbara was notified, she insisted that her girls were upstairs asleep in their beds, safe and sound. And when she called to tell their father that their only daughters were gone, their only children were gone, all she heard was screaming before he hung up the phone. This is where I'll leave you today. In the next episode, we will dive deeper into what happened to Jennifer, Sarah, Amy, and Eliza, as well as the lengthy and insane investigation into their murders, and the numerous confessions that would be made in this case. But as always, thank you, I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Voices for Justice is hosted and produced by me, Sarah Turney. For more information about the podcast, to suggest a case, to see resources used for this episode, and to find out more about how to help the cases I discuss, visit voicesforjusticepodcast.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show in your podcast player. It really does help more people find the podcast and these cases in need of justice. Voices for Justice is a podcast that uses adult language and discusses sensitive and potentially triggering topics, including violence, abuse, and murder. This podcast may not be appropriate for younger audiences. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Some names have been changed or omitted per their request or for safety purposes. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Turney, and this is Voices for Justice. Today's episode is part 2 of my coverage of the 1991 yogurt shop murders from Austin, Texas. So if you haven't listened to part 1, I definitely recommend going back and listening to that first, otherwise this episode won't make a whole lot of sense. In part 1, I left you just after the girls' parents were notified of their deaths after they were found deceased in the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop. In this episode, I will be covering the investigation, a slew of false confessions, and eventual arrests. Because in the next decade or so, there will be a lot of missteps that I think are really important to talk about. Because unfortunately, the investigators in this case would not only fail to get justice for the girls, but create more victims in the process through false accusations and, in my opinion, downright dirty police work. Like with part 1, we have a lot to cover, so let's get into it. By the time he got the case of the yogurt shop murders, Sergeant John Jones from the Austin Police Department had already dealt with over 150 death investigations. But Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy would be his very last 4. John Jones didn't always plan to be in law enforcement. He was actually a music education major at the University of Texas when he lost his job waiting tables. He saw that the Austin Police Department was looking for cadets and applied thinking it would only be temporary. But once he compared the pay and benefits of being a cop versus being a music teacher, he decided to stay on the force. Like I briefly mentioned in the last episode, John Jones was partnered with a more senior officer, Mike Huckabee. The two men had already developed a relationship through working on other cases together, so Jones actually put in a request for Huckabee to be assigned to the yogurt shop murders with him. Both men were fathers of daughters, but above all, they trusted each other. Jones and Huckabee actually made a pact when they first got the case. They decided that they weren't going to be trigger happy. They wouldn't make an arrest before they had concrete evidence to make charges stick permanently. Unfortunately, this was not a sentiment that everyone on the team would share. Like I touched on in part 1, Huckabee was really known for his negotiation skills. So it was decided that he would handle all interviews and negotiations while Jones focused on the technical side of things. Despite being a pretty seasoned officer, Huckabee would later admit how hard the case really hit him, stating, quote, "I saw things in Vietnam and thought nothing would ever match that. Well, this matches that because it's in Austin, Texas, right down the street from where we live." End quote. After meeting with arson investigator Melvin Stahl on the night of the murders, they knew that they were in dire need of outside help. Way back in 1991, the Austin Police Department didn't really have a forensic unit. They didn't have people in-house like a ballistics expert or someone to help with blood spatter or hair and fiber analysis. They basically had someone who did fingerprint matching, and that was it. Their only option was the Texas Department of Public Safety's lab. And it, and unfortunately also its staff, were pretty new and inexperienced. But they sent the head of DNA operation, Irma Rios, to the scene. According to her later court testimony, this would be maybe her second arson case. She would also admit that although DPS did provide her with a handbook of all the proper procedures to follow while processing a crime scene like the yogurt shop murders, she wasn't really familiar with them. Another major player in this operation would be Charles Meyer from the ATF National Response Team. He and Jones worked together previously on another arson homicide case. So Jones knew his work, and he also knew that with the ATF he could get access to a lot of things that he wouldn't be able to otherwise. This would include the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP for short. If you weren't familiar with this program, it's basically this huge nationwide database for law enforcement that collects and analyzes violent crimes. So someone could plug in things like arson, homicide, sexual assault, and pull up similar cases. That way, they can compare and contrast to see if the perpetrator might have been involved with another similar crime in the past and determine if they had a repeat offender on their hands. This way, they can not only hopefully gather more clues to figure out who they thought did this, but also possibly prevent something like this from happening again in the future. So basically, it's a very cool and powerful tool, especially for 1991, and Jones really wanted access to it. But unfortunately, the yogurt shop murders would be considered unique, not matching to any other crime in the system. However, in addition to getting access to VICAP, with Charles Meyer from the ATF on board, Jones and Huckabee would also have access to things like polygraph experts, behavioral analysts, and wiretaps. So even though the arson investigator was a little nervous about bringing in a federal agency so quickly, thinking it might kind of upset the team, he gave in to Jones and backed him up on the ask. And a few hours after Jones's request, they at least had a few more extra officials that they wouldn't have had otherwise to help them analyze this extremely complicated scene. So let's talk about what they found. They were able to recover the .380 shell casing from the pistol used to shoot Amy Ayers for the second time. This was found in a clogged drain near the main sink in the prep area by where Amy was found. After the smoke and steam cleared, they also found a large amount of blood at the scene. This led them to believe that the girls most likely died from their gunshot wounds before the fire was even set. They also noticed that there was a lot more damage on the items that were closer to the ceiling versus the items that were closer to the ground. Containers on shelves, a mop handle, and even a ladder with its 2 top steps completely melted off indicated that the fire started above ground level. From there, they believed that it spread across the ceiling of the shop and then down to the ground. And they estimate that the fire reached over 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 650 degrees Celsius. Melvin Stahl's report would confirm that the fire started on that metal shelving unit, the one that was next to Jennifer and the back door, which would correlate with Jennifer having the worst burns. He would also confirm that it was most likely that Jennifer Harbison's body was originally stacked on top of her sister Sarah and Eliza before somehow rolling off. Like we see in a lot of investigations, there were definitely some missteps. One of the most crucial, in my opinion, being the fact that they didn't collect as many fingerprints from the scene as they probably should have. The woman in charge of collecting fingerprints was Rachel Rife, and she would later admit that she didn't really dust for fingerprints in all of the areas you might expect people to touch, but instead she pretty much just took the prints that she could see with her naked eye. The team also failed to wear booties or keep a log of who was coming and going to be able to cross-reference for contamination. And they didn't even go through the trash at the shop. They also improperly stored crime scene evidence and eventually lost quite a few items. The melted "I can't believe it's yogurt shop" phone would actually be misplaced and later recovered from an Austin Fire Department training center. The metal shelving unit where the fire supposedly originated was wrapped in crime scene tape, but Rios admitted that they actually used it to store other pieces of evidence. This shelving unit, along with the melted ladder and the charred mop and mop bucket, were later moved to an alleyway, but then they just seemed to disappear into thin air. And the lock on the back door, the lock that they believe may have been tampered with by the killers, well, that was gone too. Although Irma Rios, the manager of that very new crime lab, was in charge of the chain of custody for these items, she never took full responsibility or could explain how these things happened. After processing the scene, the medical examiner's office did finally recover the bodies of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy in order for autopsies to be completed. However, Jones would later state that he's pretty sure that by the time the girls got to Dr. Tommy J. Brown, the man who would perform these autopsies, that he had already heard an earful from Les Carpenter, who, if you don't remember from part 1, was the deputy medical examiner in charge while the chief medical examiner was out of town. And after fighting with Jones about performing tests on the girls on the scene, he reluctantly gave in while pretty much just kicking and screaming. So, Jones reports that Dr. Brown was less than friendly when he and Huckabee showed up to his office. And ultimately, both men would blame Les Carpenter for Dr. Brown doing what they believed was a rushed job. In their opinion, it was just less thorough than other autopsies they'd seen. One major issue was that they weren't even tested for accelerant. This wasn't done on the scene or after the fact. Apparently, the reason for it not being done at the scene was because nobody smelt any type of accelerant. There was no gas, there was no hairspray, there was nothing that would indicate that an accelerant was used. But no one really knows why Dr. Brown didn't perform this test during the autopsies, other than maybe this tiff between the Austin PD and the ME's office. But the autopsies were able to determine some pretty crucial things about the girls. Sarah Harbison had been sexually assaulted, though they couldn't confirm that it had been done with the ice cream scoop found between her legs. They also recovered 2 sets of male DNA from Jennifer Harbison. After questioning her boyfriend, it was confirmed that she visited him a few hours before going to work and they had sex. So 1 set of the male DNA was confirmed to be his, but the other set remains unidentified. It was also confirmed that Amy Ayers was sexually assaulted, and they were able to find a single strand of DNA. This would be put into CODIS, which was a pretty new system in 1991, but no match was found at the time. By the afternoon after the girls were found, the Austin Police Department decided that in order to maintain the integrity of the investigation and to ensure that they would be able to bring the perpetrator to justice beyond a shadow of a doubt, they held back the following 13 pieces of information about the case from the public. 1. How and where the fire was started. 2. That the key was still in the front door when firefighters arrived. 3. The amount of money taken from the store. 4. The arrangement of the girls' bodies. 5. What was used to tie the girls up. 6. The office key was found under the cash register. 7. No one entered the office. 8. 2 of the girls' underwear was missing. 9. Both .22 and .380 caliber guns were used in the murders. 10. Amy's brother's leather bomber jacket was missing. 11. The bruise under Amy's chin. 12. That Amy was strangled and what she was strangled with. 13. That Amy was shot twice with 2 different guns. Unfortunately, a lot of this privileged information was already getting out around town. People knew that some of the girls' bodies had been stacked, that one girl was shot twice, and they even knew about the ice cream scoop. On Monday morning, the Austin PD put out a nationwide dispatch to other police departments. This had details of the case, and it asked them to reach out to them if they had any similar crimes in their jurisdictions. And not too long after, the local newspaper, The Statesman, which in my opinion would ultimately be a huge detriment to this case, ran a front page story quoting the investigators talking about details such as what the girls were tied up with, and that the back door of the shop was not locked and the front door was. And on Tuesday, the Austin PD themselves released even more information. They said that they believed that there were 2 perpetrators, and that Amy Ayers had been shot in the head twice, while the other girls were only shot once in the back of the head. They also released that they believed it was a robbery. These are small details, but it could be the difference between catching the person who did this and a wrongful conviction, which, as I've already mentioned, will become a major issue in this case. And hindsight is 20/20, right? I don't think that the media or the Austin PD were purposely trying to hurt this investigation. I think the city of Austin and their police department had never seen a case like this, and they didn't really know what to do. It's also clear that the city was an absolute wreck over the murders of these 4 young girls, and they were demanding answers. So both the media and the police were trying to give them those answers, not really knowing the damage that they were doing. The residents of Austin were obviously extremely terrified and sad.
The Lanier School community, student body, and faculty and staff have been saddened by the tragic deaths of 4 young ladies for whom we mourn today.
They're grieving for their classmates. 3 of the victims were students at Lanier High School. Today, the students tried to deal with the loss and their pain together.
This is probably the worst, most heinous crime that has happened in the city ever.
Students are encouraged to talk about their feelings. A team of counselors is at the school to help them. There are so many questions and fears now about things many of these teenagers never even thought about.
I mean, they died and they were so, they were our age. And I mean, it makes you really think, tomorrow isn't promised. And I mean, anybody here may not be here tomorrow, and it's just scary and it hurts.
I mean, you don't ever think anybody's going to come into a yogurt place and shoot you. And shoot you and all your friends. It just doesn't happen in a yogurt place.
And in addition to the case getting just a huge amount of press, people came out in droves to help with the search for the person that killed these girls.
More than 100 co-workers, friends, and even some who don't know the families of the 4 girls stood in line waiting for their chance to help. Inside the packets are the tools to canvass the neighborhood near the yogurt shop, keeping the memory of the girls and the crime alive. For Donna Robinson and her daughter Tracy, there is pain. There's also anger and determination.
I hope they realize we're not going to give up until they're found.
Help. These high school students are some of the dozens who joined forces at 5 area malls today. For those who knew the girls, handing out these flyers is part of the healing.
It helps just a lot to feel that I'm actually a part of it, to help to capture this person, because I want to see these people put behind bars.
It seems like almost overnight, the small town feel of Austin, Texas disappeared as the reality of the murders set in. There was also a lot of scrutiny on Bryce Foods, the parent company of I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. And their CEO, Bill Bryce, flew from Dallas to meet with the girls' families and to announce his offer of a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the person or people who killed the girls. He also took this time to defend himself, saying that he had hundreds of stores all around the world, including 2 more stores in the state of Texas. He explained that this shop was no different from the others in terms of who they hired and leaving them alone. He hired a lot of teenage girls who closed together alone all the time. And this was their first murder. But eventually, the families would bring a civil suit against Bryce Foods. And they would ultimately settle out of court for $12 million. On Tuesday, December 10th, 1991, there was a funeral held for all 4 girls. Over 1,500 people attended, including the mayor and the chief of police. Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy were buried side by side at the Capitol Memorial Gardens, while Eliza was buried closer to her family's home at the Austin Memorial Park Cemetery. All funeral expenses were covered by Bryce Foods. Investigators actually taped the entire ceremony just in case the perpetrators were in the crowd watching. And they even had officers posted at their graves doing surveillance, just in case. Christmas and New Year's came and went, but on January 3rd, Jones was right back to work. And it was at this time that Jones wrote Police Chief Jim Everett a memo updating him on the investigation and asking him for help. Jones explained that the amount of phone tips had dramatically slowed down, and he discussed his interviews with all known employees and customers that were at the Hillside Strip Mall on the night of the murders. He also informed the chief that the FBI Behavioral Science Unit intended on creating a personality profile of the offenders, and that they suggested going to the media with that profile, specifically Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted. Jones then explained that while he appreciated having 4 patrolmen to aid in the investigation, that he needed 4 investigators solely dedicated to the case for at least 60 days, or until it was solved. And luckily, Chief Everett totally agreed, and he sanctioned a task force made up of officials from the Austin PD, the Austin Fire Department, the ATF, the FBI, Texas DPS Intelligence, the Travis County Sheriff's Office, and the Travis County DA's office. After a day-long meeting with the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, they created that behavioral profile of the perpetrators. And per their recommendation, John Jones did go to the press stating that an arrest was imminent, which, of course, made the front page of the local newspaper, The Statesman. By the following Monday, exactly 1 month after the murders, they held a press conference where John Jones stated that he must have been misquoted about the arrest being imminent. However, he would later admit that this was a lie the FBI instructed him to tell the media, stating, quote, "I did what the FBI told me to do, and I got slammed for it." End quote. But after this somewhat embarrassing issue, Jones then released their behavioral profile, stating the following 5 points. 1. More than one person was involved in the murders, and one of them had a dominant personality. 2. They were probably white and in their late teens to mid-20s. 3. And this is a long one, so stay with me. The perpetrator with the dominant personality probably didn't finish high school and was considered an underachiever with below-average grades and a discipline problem. This person probably had an explosive personality and is quick to get angry, especially while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And they are incredibly impulsive without thinking about the consequences of their actions. They will engage in physical confrontation only when they have the upper hand. But they will not engage in confrontation without their friends present. They are probably unemployed or working a menial job. They will have a history of changing jobs, isn't a dependable employee, and has a history of being absent. They most likely live with and are dependent on an older person such as a parent. This person is probably very familiar with the area and frequents it often, most likely living in the neighborhood. They probably have a criminal history and are most likely abusive to women. This person most likely has no remorse for killing the victims, but is very anxious because things may not have gone as planned. They are also extremely concerned about their accomplices because they are most likely experiencing a lot of regret. They theorize that this would create a lot of paranoia between the perpetrators and possibly lead to violence amongst themselves. 4. Although the perpetrators would not have a lot of blood on them, they most likely immediately cleaned up and changed their clothing after the murders. 5. The perpetrators might have returned to the scene of the crime to watch police and fire departments. They may have left town and they may have missed some days of work. This profile would appear as an entire page in the Statesman with a headline of, quote, "Many people know this killer. Do you?" End quote. By February, Jones and his team were given more office space, more equipment, and more money for overtime to help solve the murders. Jones would later state that he was essentially given whatever he needed for the investigation, and that no one wanted to be the person that hindered it. They knew the entire world was watching, and they still had a lot of work to do, with at least 50 more witnesses to interview. By the end of the month, 12 billboards with the girls' faces and the words "Who killed these girls" were placed strategically around the city. Over time, there would be 20 more put up as the reward money rose to $100,000. Let's get into some of the leads and the suspects in this case. In my opinion, one of the things that makes this such a large and complicated case to the point that I have to have so many parts on it is this section right here. Because even at this point, just a few months into the investigation, there were an insane amount of leads and about 800 suspects. There are also numerous confessions. So let's get into it. While Jones was holding down the fort and running the team, Huckabee and Chuck Meyer from the ATF were interviewing as many people as they could. They interviewed convicted serial killers, a young man who had extremely violent episodes, including raping his younger sister, and notably 2 people that in 1990 used small caliber pistols to rob a bowling alley, shoot the staff execution style, and then set the building on fire. But every interview ended the same, in a dead end with no solid connection to the yogurt shop murders. At this time, the Austin Police Department was also watching another case very closely. See, just a few weeks after the yogurt shop murders, a woman named Colleen Reed had been taken from an Austin car wash. She was then sexually assaulted and killed. It wouldn't be until 1998 when a man named Kenneth McDuff, who had been sentenced to death for another murder, finally gave the location of Colleen's body to authorities. He did this in exchange for a more favorable sentence for his nephew, who was being held on drug charges. McDuff never actually officially confessed to killing Colleen Reed, but he told authorities where her body was buried, along with the locations of 2 other women that he had raped and murdered. And ultimately, he would never confess to killing the girls from the yogurt shop murders either. But some people still believe that Kenneth McDuff was the true killer of the girls, and that the secret died with him when he was executed in 1998. The Austin Police Department also got a ton of prank calls and false leads. There was one man who said that he'd seen the killers put yogurt inside of the girls' vaginas. When the police followed up, he said he never made the call, but when he was confronted with the audio of the call, he said that he was just joking. There was a woman who called in to say that it was her boyfriend that was the killer, and another man that said that his friend told him that he'd killed the girls and cut them up into pieces. There was a report of chickens being put inside of the girls, that the KKK was involved, that the girls' heads were chopped off, pretty much anything you could imagine. Honestly, some of the confessions are just so disgusting that I don't even want to repeat them on this podcast. And since according to investigators, they didn't hold any weight, I won't. But again, pretty much any disgusting thing you could imagine was said about the murder of these girls. A more promising lead came from the night of the murders. In part 1, I discussed reports of a Hispanic man sitting in a light-colored car outside of the yogurt shop near closing time. Well, a few months after the murders, the Austin PD ended up putting out a composite sketch for him, and the tips began pouring in. Some residents quickly identified 19-year-old Armando Razzo as someone who resembled the sketch, and as someone who had pretty odd behavior that would go along with the FBI behavioral profile of the suspected perpetrators. Following the murders, Razzo actually quit his job at the Sonic Drive-In and told his friends he was going into hiding. But before the Austin PD could even get to him for questioning, the Statesman ran with the story and the headline, "Teen Arrested in Yogurt Shop Murders." This is one of countless incorrect and, in my opinion, trigger-happy headlines. When Jones was actually able to interview Razzo, not only was he able to provide a solid alibi, but he had 3 witnesses to vouch for him. Razzo was definitely in trouble with the law, but he did not kill the girls. A more likely match for the sketch would come from Mexican nationalist Alberto Jimenez Cortez. And people said that if he was involved, surely his 2 buddies Ricardo Hernandez and Porfirio Villa Saavedra were involved as well. All 3 men were actually already wanted for the kidnapping and rape of a woman at an Austin nightclub about a month before the yogurt shop murders. But like Jones and Huckabee promised each other, they weren't going to jump to arrest that easily. They wanted to gather more information first. So, in the summer of 1992, the case and the sketch were featured on America's Most Wanted. And people continued to identify the person in the sketch as Alberto Cortez. So the Austin PD went after Cortez, Hernandez, and Saavedra. Jones did notify the families, but he warned them not to get their hopes up. But it did look pretty promising. The men were known for drug trafficking, brutality, and crimes against women. And they conveniently left town right after the murders. At this point, Chuck Meyer requested permission for he and bilingual ATF agent Jack Barnett to be able to make the trip to Mexico City once all 3 men were located. Jones, of course, really wanted to go as well, but he was told to hang back because if he went, then the entire city would get wind of how serious of a lead this was. In August of 1992, the Austin PD actually struck a deal with the Mexican consulate. They would hand over the kidnapping and rape case from the Austin nightclub. And in exchange, the Austin PD would be allowed to interrogate the 3 men once they were found. No one was really fond of this deal, but it seemed like their only option at the time. By October, Saavedra and Cortez were arrested on suspicion of being involved in the yogurt shop murders. And they were flown to Mexico City, where they were then charged with the kidnapping and rape of the woman from the Austin nightclub, as well as drug trafficking and gun smuggling. They weren't being charged with the yogurt shop murders just yet, but this meant that they were at least able to question the men about the case. This was kind of a big deal. The DA's office even put out the following statement, quote, "Not only the people of Texas, but the entire United States has grieved with us over our loss. This case represents an unprecedented level of cooperation, and we look forward to continuing to work with the Mexican officials." End quote. But they had a major problem. Mexico's Deputy Attorney General was absolutely against extradition of his citizens to the United States. So, although they did agree to let U.S. authorities question the 3 men, they didn't say anything about extraditing them to the United States for prosecution. And this was a major issue for the Austin PD because both Cortez and Saavedra would ultimately confess to killing all 4 girls. When reporters approached Saavedra and asked him why he did it, he just shook his head, and authorities took him away. Later that day, it was reported that he, quote, "forced the girls to submit, then he raped them, tied them up, and shot them." End quote. Jones again warned the girls' families not to get their hopes up. But how could you not? Jennifer and Sarah's mother would state that she immediately got sick to her stomach. And, quote, "You want to feel good about it, but it brings the reality back." End quote. The thing is, Jones wasn't really convinced that these were the guys. That these were the guys that killed Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy. So, when Mexican officials asked for the autopsy reports, Jones refused. He told author Beverly Lowry, quote, "If we'd done that, they'd have every piece of information they needed to charge them, try them, find them guilty, put them away for life. And we weren't convinced that they were even there." End quote. And pretty quickly, Saavedra's story started to fall apart. When he was questioned by Huckabee and another Austin PD official, he'd said that maybe he killed 3 girls that night, mutilated them, and tied them up with rope, which, as we know, does not match up with the way that the girls were actually killed. By the end of the first day of questioning, the Austin Police Department was certain that these were not the men responsible for the yogurt shop murders. And both Saavedra and Cortez would ultimately recant their confessions. They stated that while they were on the plane to Mexico City, officials threatened to hurt their families, including violating their wives, daughters, and sisters. And they stated that the officials kept putting plastic bags over their heads. When Huckabee confronted Cortez about the witness statement placing him at the yogurt shop that night, he stated, quote, "I wasn't there. I didn't see who did it. Perhaps you will find me guilty. I'm going to tell you this. I was never there and I never did any of that. It could have been someone that looked like me. I'm not the only one who has long hair or the only car. Does she have a license plate? She should have given a license plate. They're going to dispose of my life, my time, and my thoughts. And do you know what? You can give me the death penalty. And I'm going to die telling the truth. Because I didn't do anything." End quote. Saavedra would express a similar sentiment, stating, quote, "Just because I'm a criminal doesn't mean I killed them. That's not what that means. I know you're going to take me, but I will never say that I did something I did not do. This is a total waste. Since I am a criminal, then no one believes me." End quote. Ultimately, Hernandez, the third man believed to have been possibly associated with the crime, was never caught. Saavedra and Cortez would be tried and convicted of the kidnapping and rape of the woman from the Austin nightclub. But after years of back and forth with the Mexican authorities, the men were never charged in the yogurt shop murders. The families of the girls would hold on to hope for years that these were the men that were the true perpetrators of the crime. And like Kenneth McDuff, there are still people that believe that these 3 men are responsible for killing the girls. By the 1-year anniversary of the yogurt shop murders, morale was really down. The girls' parents wanted answers about the Mexican nationalists, and Jones and Huckabee were convinced that they didn't do it. The case was taking its toll on both Huckabee and Jones, but John Jones's life was pretty much being torn apart by it. The case was all-consuming for him. He developed relationships with these families and felt a great responsibility to get answers for them, not only on a professional level, but on a personal level. And it was affecting all areas of his life, his marriage, his kids, and his mental health. Jones would spend the entire anniversary of the murders catching up on sleep. You can really tell that the families trusted Jones. And one thing that I read that really touched my heart in this case was that one day, Jones and Amy Ayer's father were at a basketball game. And Amy's father turned to Jones and told him that he looked really bad. And he even suggested that he take a break from the case. This man, this father who desperately wanted answers for his daughter's murder, was somehow able to put his personal wants and needs aside for the case to be solved and have enough compassion for Jones to understand that he really needed this break. I think it's just a huge testament to how much they all genuinely cared for each other. And I have to say, I don't see that a lot. Jones would ask for a 15-day administrative leave, but he was denied. It would take a letter from his psychiatrist explaining that he was exhibiting 90% of PTSD symptoms, and recommending a 1-month leave for Jones to get some time off to recover. But he wouldn't even use all 30 days before feeling compelled to come back. But like a lot of investigators, Jones's passion for the case wasn't rewarded, and ultimately he would be reassigned, much to the dismay of the families, and much to the dismay of Jones himself, who had never asked to be fully reassigned. I think that there were a lot of contributing factors to the frustration and the burnout of Jones. There was a lot of turnover in leadership at the Austin Police Department, and policies and procedures were constantly changing. People were being pulled and then reassigned to cases, including the yogurt shop murders. And undoubtedly, one of the worst, most damaging players to be pulled from the case was a man named Hector Polanco. As Jones would say, quote, "Everybody has a Hector story. Everybody." End quote. Senior Sergeant Hector Polanco was kind of a hotshot in the Austin Police Department in the 80s and 90s. Not only for his good looks and confidence, but because he miraculously had a 100% clearance rate on his cases, with a very special knack for getting confessions without evidence. When people would ask him, how was he just so good at his job, Polanco would state that he just had a special ability, that he was able to grab the truth right from the hearts of the people that he interrogated. People in the community knew him as the Boogeyman, or El Diablo, while other officers and lawyers would refer to him as the Cobra. Unfortunately, at this time during his heyday in the 80s and 90s, this concept of false or coerced confessions wasn't as widely discussed as it is today. People just couldn't wrap their head around the idea that someone would actually confess to something that they didn't do. And unfortunately, it would take decades for the confessions obtained by Polanco to come back to haunt him, way after many lives were already destroyed. In 1988, Polanco obtained a confession from a young man named Christopher Ochoa. This was in relation to the rape and murder of Nancy Dupriest. Ochoa immediately denied having any involvement, but after Polanco repeatedly told him that he would die if he didn't confess, that if this man didn't tell him right now that he committed this murder, he would make sure that he was sentenced to death. So Ochoa said that he did it, and that his friend Richard Danziger helped. In his mind, he knew that he was innocent, so he figured that he would just tell them, what they wanted to hear right then and there and prove that innocence later. He would describe this moment stating, quote, "You're just like shaking because you don't know. If you knew, you'd tell them because you don't want to die. You're thinking, I don't want to die. I've got to think of something." End quote. His friend Richard Danziger would maintain his innocence throughout the entire trial, but ultimately both men were sentenced to life in prison. 6 years into their sentence, an inmate in a Texas prison would write letters to the police and media claiming that he was the man that killed Nancy Dupriest. But it would take another 6 years before DNA evidence would prove this to be true. And both Ochoa and Danziger would be released after serving 12 years for a crime that they never committed. Unfortunately, by that time, Danziger had already been viciously beaten in prison to the point where he actually had to have parts of his brain removed. And he was never the same. But when Hector Polanco was working on the yogurt shop murders, we didn't know any of this. So he applied his very special skills to obtain several confessions in this case. In February of 1992, Polanco interrogated inmate Sean Smith, who reportedly was bragging about killing the girls. He took him into an interrogation room alone with no recording equipment, and 6 hours later, he had a confession. Must have been those special skills. But Jones was actually pretty excited about this one, thinking that it could have actually finally been solved. But after a little more digging and a polygraph test, it appeared that Smith didn't kill those girls. He did have information relevant to the case, but nothing that wasn't already confirmed to have been leaked to the public. When asked why he signed the confession, Smith admitted that Polanco actually made him believe that he did it. The next month, Polanco obtained another confession from Alex Briones, who was accused of raping and burning a woman to death. Again, the interview was done with just Polanco in a room without any recording devices. After obtaining the confession, he called Jones and Huckabee to announce that he had the man that killed Sarah, Jennifer, Amy, and Eliza. But the thing was, he would only talk to Polanco and no one else. Huckabee wasn't having any of this, and after talking to Briones for himself, he came out of that room and told his team that that was not the guy. Briones would later break down and say that he didn't kill the girls and only said he did because Polanco threatened him and told him what to say. Within 10 days, Polanco was taken off the yogurt shop murders case and eventually let go after an investigation by Internal Affairs. But he would later sue the department for discrimination and ultimately be reinstated. He would receive more promotions and he would retire with full benefits and pension. He would be replaced by Senior Sergeant Ron Smith, and Smith himself had a pretty colorful past with the department. He actually shot and killed an unarmed 17-year-old boy, and he sat on the head of a handcuffed man while he was on a waterbed, ultimately leading to him being smothered to death. Years would go by with more leads, more changes in the department, and more scandals. In October of 1995, the Austin Police Department created a task force specifically to target drug trafficking and money laundering. But undercover informants quickly accused the members of the Austin PD of protecting the drug dealers in exchange for sexual favors, cocaine, and all-expense-paid trips to the Super Bowl. A lot of people believe that by January of 1996, Chief Watson announcing that they would be taking a fresh look at the yogurt shop murders was kind of to distract everyone from all of the scandals. Assigned to this new, fresh look at the case was homicide detective Paul Johnson, but he was only doing it part-time. Johnson was kind of known for being a lone wolf and a stickler for details. So it was kind of perfect for him because his job was basically to comb back through all of Jones's and Huckabay's work for any missed opportunities or leads. And by all accounts, Johnson quickly became as obsessed with the case as Jones had been. At this point, there were more than 1,200 suspects. There were also 5,000 pages of handwritten notes and over 10,000 pages of reports. One big thing he wanted to do was revisit the confessions from the Mexican nationalists Cortez and Saavedra, but he wasn't able to move much along with the Mexican government. And as for the other 1,197 suspects, he didn't find anything in the database that would result in an arrest or conviction. But on July 31st, 1997, there would be even more turnover in the Austin Police Department when Chief Watson left Austin for a job with the Department of Justice. She was replaced with Bruce Mills as the interim chief, and Mills quickly gave Johnson a brand new team to exclusively work on the yogurt shop murders. And this is when they went way back to 1991 and revisited the confession of 16-year-old Maurice Pierce. On December 14th, 1991, so about a week after the yogurt shop murders, Maurice was arrested at the North Cross Mall after reports came in that he was walking around with a .22 caliber pistol in one pocket and 16 bullets in the other. When Maurice was brought into custody, none other than Hector Polanco insisted on doing the interview. And by the next morning, he had a confession for the yogurt shop murders. This confession not only incriminated himself, but his friends as well. Despite this confession being immediately discredited by Jones in 1991, and again by Johnson in 1996, by 1997, it was determined that this lead had not been properly investigated or closed. When police questioned Maurice again, he would say, "I don't stand by my confession," and that he, like so many others, felt forced by Polanco to confess. Luckily, the Austin PD actually still had the pistol that was taken from Maurice in 1991, so they sent the gun off to be tested to see if it was used in the crime. And the results were a definitive no. The gun that was taken from Maurice was absolutely not used in the yogurt shop murders. But investigators weren't convinced, and they started to chip away at his friends that were with him in the days after the murders. These friends were Forrest Welburn, who was 15 at the time of the murders, and Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, who were both 17 at the time of the murders. And before long, they obtained 2 more confessions, one from Robert and one from Michael, while Maurice and Forrest maintained their innocence. Despite the gun not matching, despite Maurice recanting his confession from when he was 16 years old, and despite Polanco's unscrupulous interview tactics being more well known to the Austin PD at this time, by the end of 1999, Maurice Pierce, Robert Springsteen, Forrest Wellborn, and Michael Scott would be arrested for the murders of Sarah, Jennifer, Eliza, and Amy. The thing about this case is it's so hard to get all of the information into one episode, or at least all of the information that I find to be pretty important into one episode. So I hope that breaking it up into these types of chunks helps you better absorb it, because for me, it really does help me better tell you the story. So with that being said, in the next episode, we're going to dive deep into these four men, what they were doing around the time of the murders, their interrogations, their confessions, and their eventual trials, as well as where the case stands today. Because in my opinion, there is more hope than ever to get justice for these girls. But as always, thank you, I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Voices for Justice is hosted and produced by me, Sarah Turney. For more information about the podcast, to suggest a case, to see resources used for this episode, and to find out more about how to help the cases I discuss, visit voicesforjusticepodcast.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show in your podcast player. It really does help more people find the podcast and these cases in need of justice. This podcast may not be appropriate for younger audiences. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Some names have been changed or omitted per their request or for safety purposes. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Turney, and this is Voices for Justice. This episode is the third and final installment of my coverage of the 1991 yogurt shop murders in Austin, Texas. If you haven't listened to the first two parts of this series, I definitely recommend going back and listening to those first, or else this episode won't make any sense. As a quick refresher, in part 1, I went over the background of murder victims Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, and I walked through the timeline of events leading up to their deaths. In part 2, I discussed the first 8 years of the investigation, including incredibly devoted detective John Jones and Hector Polanco, aka El Diablo, who would later become notorious for obtaining false confessions. I also went over a few suspects and loose ends that haven't been tied up yet. And I ended with the spotlight on 4 old suspects that were cleared twice before investigators decided to take another look. These suspects were 16-year-old Maurice Pierce, 15-year-old Forrest Wellborn, and Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen, who were both 17 years old. Let's start with some background on these 4 guys. Starting with Maurice Pierce, who the investigators did believe was the ringleader. Maurice was born in Houston, Texas, and had 3 sisters who he was pretty close to. Their parents would eventually divorce, and by the age of 12, Maurice would start doing drugs and getting into more trouble. Out of all of the 4 boys, Maurice was the only one with a pretty serious police record. He'd been in trouble in the past for basically stealing cars, one of which was a man who just left his keys in the ignition. Maurice saw it and took it for a joyride. The other was when he stole his dad's car and took it to Houston. He was also suspended from school for fighting, and he's been in trouble for stealing fire extinguishers, trespassing, and assault. Out of this group of 4 boys, Maurice appears to have been the closest to Forrest Wellborn. Growing up, Forrest moved around between his parents and his step-parents a lot. He was often described as quiet and kind of withdrawn. His teachers would talk about how he wouldn't really pay attention in class and would mostly just sit there and draw. Rob Springsteen would describe him as more of a follower, specifically doing whatever Maurice told him to do. Forrest didn't have an extensive police record, but he was arrested once for being with a group of kids who were stealing beer. He was actually just sitting in the car and the police came and arrested him. Robert Springsteen had actually just moved to Austin a few months before the murders. His parents were divorced and he wasn't getting along with his new stepfather in West Virginia. So he asked his dad if he could come live with him and his girlfriend in one of their 2 condos. Rob did have some issues at school. Teachers said that he quickly wore out his welcome and would kind of wear these obnoxious outfits for attention. He also had a pretty nasty attitude, was unapologetic, and missed a lot of school. So eventually he was transferred to an alternative school, but his father was hoping that, with this fresh start in Austin, it would help him turn things around. So Rob was enrolled at McCallum High School, where Sarah, Eliza, and Jennifer attended, and his dad just kind of hoped for the best. Rob joined the football team, but he quit pretty quickly after that when he apparently didn't see eye to eye with the coach. And pretty soon, Rob would pull a knife on a classmate at a McDonald's. The school did give Rob another chance, but he eventually would be sent to an alternative school. After this, he pretty much just stopped going to school altogether. When the Austin PD spoke with him in 1991 about the yogurt shop murders, one of the cops asked him how long it had been since he'd been to school. And Rob responded, quote, "A week? 2 weeks? I don't know. Probably at least a month. Maybe a month and a half or 2 months. Because they sent me there and that's when I quit. I was like, screw this." End quote. Rob's best friend and roommate was Michael Scott. Mike was born in Micronesia and moved around a lot. His parents were divorced and his mother had some pretty intense emotional issues that made things difficult for him at home. He wasn't great at school because he did have severe dyslexia that affected him a lot. But he did enjoy some extracurricular activities like football, drama, and playing the viola. Mike was also in the Boy Scouts and achieved Life Scout at age 16. Now, I actually used to work with kids in foster care, and at one point I pretty much had to become a Boy Scout leader, and I can tell you that Life Scout is not easy to obtain. It's the 2nd highest rank in the program. It takes a crazy amount of hours and dedication to get to that rank. When Mike did eventually quit football and drama and playing the viola, the only real activity that he kept up with was his Explorer Scouts group. This group was specifically dedicated to the study of the dress and culture of pre-1840 Native Americans. After Mike had to repeat his sophomore year, he basically just stopped going to classes just like Rob, but this Explorer group would be the only thing that he kept up with. In November of 1991, Mike moved in with Rob Springsteen and his family. Rob's dad wasn't too thrilled about this, but after Rob said that Mike was having problems at home and promised everything would be fine, he gave in. Like I mentioned before, they would barely go to school, and they spent a lot of time drinking, smoking weed, doing mushrooms, and dropping acid. I can't say for sure, but I have a feeling that these 2 boys in particular were not really being supervised. In fact, one interesting thing to note here is that Rob's dad would actually report Rob and Mike missing to the police on the day of the murders. He would tell police that he hadn't seen either of them for about 2 days. But later in court, he would testify that he never made that call. When Rob was questioned about this later, he would say that he was probably gone for a few days, but he definitely was not missing. None of these 4 boys were perfect. They often looked for trouble and they found it. They were what the Austin PD would consider to be PIBs, which as a refresher is an acronym for Person in Black. Basically, someone who looked alternative. They were the opposite of what Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy were. It was basically 4 bad boys versus 4 good girls. Now that we've learned a little bit more about who these guys were as teenagers, let's take a look at what they said that they were doing on the day of the murders. We're also going to take a look at this trip that they took that weekend. This, unfortunately, is kind of a mashup of all 4 of their stories, but you should be able to follow along, so just bear with me. On Friday, December 6th, 1991, Mike and Rob say that they woke up in their condo, despite having been reported missing from that condo by Rob's dad. But they say that they woke up, went to the pool, smoked some weed, and after this they left and pretended to go to school. After this, they ended up at McCallum High School so that Mike could talk to a girl named Amber that he really liked before the bell rang. So they weren't actually attending school, they were just going there to kind of see their friends. Mike would say that they got there by riding the city bus, but Rob would say that he didn't know how they got there, but it definitely wasn't the bus. By 2:30, Rob, Mike, Maurice, and Forrest all met up at a local bowling alley, though some of the boys didn't remember even going there at all. From there, they all went to North Cross Mall in Maurice's car. Despite Maurice having a pretty strict rule about not leaving any trash in his car or getting it dirty pretty much in any way at all, they ended up sharing a 12-pack of beer on the way, and by the time they got to the mall, they said that they were pretty buzzed. When they got to the mall, they kind of just walked around looking for trouble like they always did, and eventually ended up hanging out in the food court. Here, they would see a ton of their friends because it was a Friday, it was the mall, it was the holiday season, and everyone was there. When it started to get dark outside, they knew that this was the time that the girls in their Hooters uniforms would start going in for their shifts. So the boys literally post up outside, waiting to watch them walk in. Not long after this, Maurice and Forrest leave to go to Maurice's sister Renee's house because he promised to watch her kids. Mike and Rob stay behind at the mall and they wait for the Rocky Horror Picture Show to start at midnight. Rob snuck into the show, but according to Mike, he wasn't able to get in, so Mike just waited in the lobby for Rob. They actually wanted to attend a cast party that night, but they weren't able to find it, so they just got a ride from someone at the mall and were dropped off at Mike's mom's house. This would have been about 2 or 2:30 in the morning. But the thing is, Mike has a pretty different recollection of this night. He says he remembers all 4 of them being together, but not at the mall. According to Mike, Maurice picked them up and took them to 6th Street where they had some beer. From what I could gather, 6th Street is basically a popular area for bars and nightlife. So whether they picked up some beers and went to 6th Street or they were served on 6th Street because maybe they had some type of fake IDs, I don't know. Mike just says that they were there, and this area will come up again. But after they all have a few beers, Mike insists that he and Rob were back at their condo by 10:30, where they actually watched Robin Hood with Kevin Costner and fell asleep. Mike's story will more closely mirror the story that Maurice would tell police when he was arrested for having the gun about a week later. Maurice remembers hanging out with Forrest in this area that they called the Fungus, which was basically like this grassy area where kids would hang out and drink and smoke. According to Maurice, this is before Forrest borrowed his gun and possibly killed the girls. But we'll get to that in a minute. Although their stories are kind of all over the place for the day of the murders, they would all become a lot more consistent for the next day, Saturday, December 7th. On this day, everybody slept in pretty late, Mike and Rob at the condo and Forrest and Maurice at Renee's house. Maurice and Forrest spent the entire day watching Renee's kids until about 9:30 at night. Rob didn't do much of anything that day, and Mike would spend the day with his explorer group for a craft session. That day, they were hand sewing turkey feathers to make a fringe for their pants. I don't know all the specifics of it, but it seems pretty cool. And according to the members of the group, Mike was his normal, happy self. Around 10 p.m., Maurice picks up his father from work, drops him back off at home, and then uses the car to grab the boys and go to 6th Street until about 2 a.m. After this, Maurice and Forrest drop off Mike and Rob at their condo. Then Maurice drives the car back to his dad's house so he would have it for work in the morning. He and Forrest then start walking back to Maurice's sister's house. But along the way, they see a Nissan dealership and specifically a brand new gold Nissan Pathfinder with the keys in the ignition. So like Maurice had done in the past with that other vehicle, he hopped in and drove through the chained off exit of the dealership. Then he and Forrest went to go pick up Mike and Rob. First, they go to the lake to shoot the .22 pistol, but they get bored. So they decide to take a ride to San Antonio to go visit Mike's girlfriend, so he could essentially break up with her. But Maurice gets lost on the way and they have to stop for gas. While they're filling up, Rob goes in and buys a soda and a Sunday newspaper. They end up stealing the gas, which is no surprise to the attendant who had already written down their license plate number. And this is where one small thing would lead to a lot of confusion down the road. When the attendant calls the police to report the stolen gas, there's some type of error with the date. Either the attendant gave the incorrect date or the officer wrote down the date incorrectly. Either way, the report would reflect that they were there on Saturday morning instead of Sunday morning. This would ultimately be used against them in court. If this trip happened on the night of the murders and into the early morning of Saturday, it looked a lot like them trying to get out of town right after they allegedly killed the girls. But if this was the next day and they were taking their time, babysitting all day, going to this Explorer group craft session, well, that looks a little less suspicious. Either way, on the way to San Antonio, Maurice apparently falls asleep at the wheel, hits something, and they get a flat tire. But by 9 or 9:30 on Sunday morning, they finally make it to Mike's girlfriend's house in San Antonio. Her parents actually weren't home, so she wouldn't let him inside of the house, so they just go for a walk instead. While Mike was doing that, Rob read from the Sunday newspaper, specifically the story about the yogurt shop murders, and he did this out loud, reading it to Maurice and Forrest. After this, they drive back to Austin, and by 1:30, Maurice drops off Mike and Rob and returns the Pathfinder to the dealership. He and Forrest then walk back to his sister's house. For the next week or so, things are pretty quiet. Then Maurice would end up changing all 4 boys' lives forever with one cocky mistake. Like I told you at the end of part 2, on December 14th, 1991, Maurice Pierce was arrested at the North Cross Mall. This happened after reports came in that Maurice was walking around with a loaded .22 pistol in his pocket. So the Austin police came and got Maurice and his friend Forrest Wellborn. When they ask Maurice why he would be carrying a loaded gun in the mall, he just shrugs and says, quote, "just to be carrying it," end quote. When they noticed that Maurice's gun was the same type of gun used in the murders, they impound it as evidence. And then they send in their best player, Mr. Hector Polanco, Mr. El Diablo, Mr. Rip the Truth right from your heart to get that confession. By 6 a.m. the next morning, Maurice tells Polanco that he didn't kill the girls, but he knows who did, his friend Forrest Wellborn. Maurice also tells him that the gun that they took from him was probably used in the murders. He says that on the day of the murders, he and Forrest met up with a guy named Mace, who would never be identified. Maurice tells Polanco that Mace was the leader of a group of skinheads and that Forrest decided to leave with this group at that point. But before he does, he asks Maurice to borrow the gun. This was around 10 or 10:30, and when Forrest returned a few hours later, Maurice says that he smelled like hairspray, had a scratch on his neck, and that 6 bullets were missing from the gun. He also says that Forrest told him he did something bad, and that he wants to do it again. So of course, the police are all over this. They have Maurice sign a statement at about 2:30 p.m., and then they actually go to Maurice's father's house where they speak with him, and he makes small talk with the police, kind of showing them his guns and his ammo. At this point, Maurice also explains that he got the gun from his friend Johnny Holder, who had taken it from his dad. Maurice was actually supposed to pay him $100 for this gun, but he ended up just stiffing him. Then Maurice takes the police to the Fungus, where he says another .22 pistol is hidden. Maurice describes this gun as kind of a communal gun, where I guess a bunch of people would grab it and use it and return it to its hiding spot when they were done with it. But ultimately, Maurice is not able to produce this second gun. After this, they ask Maurice and his father if they could put a wire on Maurice. They were of course hoping that they could get a confession from Forrest, and they agree. Maurice gets wired up and they head over to Forrest's house, but Forrest isn't home. So after going to the neighbor's house and trying to figure out where Forrest is, they decide that Maurice is just going to drive around and look for him. As Maurice is driving around, the police are following him, and after about 2 hours of just driving around, Maurice finally sees Forrest and tells him to get in the car. Maurice then pulls into a parking lot where they would hang out all the time to talk to Forrest. The first thing he asks him is about his hair, which had apparently been cut off. Forrest tells Maurice that his dad actually made him cut off his hair in hopes of hiding his identity. At this point, Maurice just gets right into it and asks Forrest about Friday night. But Forrest is a little confused, so they kind of go round and round for a few minutes until Maurice finally says, "You wanted to use the gun, you said you did something bad, you killed the girls." And Forrest is like, "Hey man, I was just joking, I didn't kill anyone." At this point, Maurice starts getting angry, and Forrest starts getting super confused about why Maurice is so angry. And Maurice just breaks down in tears, telling Forrest, quote, "You know I ain't got the guts to kill them girls," end quote. Then they start talking about and eventually arguing over who is more scared. Eventually, this whole thing ends. Maurice gets back in the car, and the cops consider this thing to be a complete waste of time, even Mr. El Diablo. It was clear to everyone involved that Forrest had no idea what Maurice was talking about. On top of this, when they tested the gun, it wouldn't be a match for either gun used in the murders. This would just be one of the 50 confessions they would eventually obtain in this case. So they crossed the boys off their list of suspects and confessions. John Jones would later discuss this whole endeavor with the Chronicle, stating, quote, "My story is, if Hector couldn't get Pierce to confess, then he didn't do it. And Forrest couldn't organize a 2-car parade." End quote. Maurice's story about Forrest murdering the girls would be revisited again in a few years and again cleared. But in 1997, when one of the countless new task forces for this case was assembled, Maurice gets a call from our newest lead detective, Paul Johnson. Johnson has decided that after 2 reviews, this lead was maybe not investigated properly. By this time, the boys are all in their 20s, some have moved, some have stayed around the same area, but all have moved on with their lives, and none of them were really friends anymore. Maurice was married with a daughter, Forrest was also now a father and working in a car repair shop. Mike worked a variety of jobs and would assume responsibility for his girlfriend's daughter. And Rob was back in West Virginia working double shifts and helping his wife renovate a cabin that they had inherited. When Maurice gets this call in 1997 from Johnson, he's super friendly, so Johnson decides to interview him. Maurice tells Johnson that he wants to recant his original statement from 1991, and he adds, quote, "I know I made a statement when I was arrested that said that Forrest told me other details about the murders. I don't remember any of that now. I know I was very nervous, and I was trying to say things to help me get out of the police interview. And they were twisting my words up." End quote. Johnson then tries to track down Forrest, who was actually on the run for some unpaid traffic tickets. But he does eventually catch up with him, and Forrest says that he doesn't remember anything. He does say that he probably was at North Cross Mall that night with his friends, but that's only because they would usually do that on a Friday night anyway, but he couldn't say for sure. Forrest also offered to take a polygraph test, and he passed. Johnson would say that he believed Forrest, and that he appeared to be helpful. Johnson then moved on to Rob and Mike, but these conversations didn't really give him anything. In February of 1998, Johnson spoke to Rob, Mike, and Maurice again, but it yielded the same results. Again, nothing. By March of 1998, the task force was disassembled, and Johnson was sent back to working the streets. A spokesperson for the task force would praise them for clearing up more leads and making the case more manageable for the next person, but ultimately, it was just another failure. Like I mentioned in part 2, Paul Johnson was just as obsessed with this case as John Jones was, so he could just not let it go. In September of 1998, he orders another test of Maurice's 22, and it again comes back negative. It definitely was not used in the yogurt shop murders. At this point, Johnson shifts his focus from the gun to the fire itself. By this time, the original arson investigator Melvin Stahl is retired. So Johnson asks Marshal Littleton to take a look at the case. Littleton was formerly an APD officer, but he was now an ATF San Antonio fire investigator. Johnson had a specific question for Littleton. He wanted to know if the fire in the yogurt shop could be modeled or recreated using computer software. Littleton tells Johnson it's possible, but it isn't the best idea because it could, quote, eliminate a possible suspect, end quote. Determined to not let this go, Johnson asks Maurice if he would be willing to do hypnotherapy in hopes of clearing up his memory. And although Maurice's lawyer is absolutely against this, Maurice agrees, and ultimately nothing comes of it. They pretty much seem to have nothing against these 4 now men. They do have Maurice's statement from 1991 about Forrest possibly killing the girls. But they also have statements from the original officers stating that it was very unlikely to be true, and more statements from the guys saying that they didn't do anything, including Maurice taking back those original statements. But again, Johnson just can't let this one go, so he orders more gun and blood tests, but again, they give him absolutely nothing to place these 4 guys at the scene. In December of 1998, they actually get a pretty interesting tip. Reese Price, the former I Can't Believe It's Yogurt manager, actually calls Johnson to talk about some harassing phone calls that she and Jennifer Harbison had received prior to the murders. These phone calls came to their homes and to the yogurt shop. Reese Price also had a pretty scary encounter that she thinks may have been related. Before the murders, her apartment had actually been broken into. The person who broke in didn't take any valuables, but this person did go into Reese's underwear drawer and arranged a few pairs of her underwear on her bed and placed a knife from her kitchen on top. She also told Johnson that at the time of the murders, she and Jennifer Harbison looked a lot alike. They were both small and they both had long, light brown hair. Johnson is all over this, and he asks Reese to come down to the station for an interview. In that interview, Reese mentions that crawl space area that connected the yogurt shop and the party store next to them. And she adds that she and the other girls often heard noises up there. She also says that one night she was closing down the shop and she noticed shoe prints on the toilet seat in the men's room, and the ceiling tile above it was out of place. She couldn't confirm for sure if someone used the crawl space to move between the party shop and the yogurt shop, but she believed that it was possible. Early in 1999, Johnson asks Littleton again about using that software to help model the yogurt shop fire. And Littleton again advised against it. He said that basically there was just too much opportunity for error. Littleton added that if they had the ladder and that metal shelving unit that had been lost, it might be a lot easier to do something like that, but for the time being, they should hold off. Chief Stan Nee was on the job for about 9 months when he gave Paul Johnson another opportunity to put together a task force for the yogurt shop murders. This time, Johnson would act as a case agent while Senior Sergeant John Neff acted as the unit's supervisor. There were also 6 cold case detectives assigned to the unit. At this time, Kenneth McDuff was still considered to be an active suspect, along with the Mexican nationals, some folks who practiced Satanism, and of course, Maurice, Rob, Mike, and Forrest. But the focus really seemed to be on Maurice specifically. On August 6, 1999, Johnson hosted their first meeting, and he opened it with a 205-slide PowerPoint titled, quote, "The Investigative Plan to Pursue Maurice Pierce," end quote. This presentation would last 4 hours. At this point, they start looking for anyone who might be able to help them gather more information to place the boys at the scene that night. So, Detectives Hardesty and Laura go back to Rob's girlfriend of a few weeks around the time of the murder named Kelly Hanna. By this time, Kelly had a few kids, and she was in her last trimester with another. She had pretty much all but forgotten about her boyfriend of just a few weeks when she was a teenager, so needless to say, she didn't really remember much. They press her for information for hours. Eventually, they tell her that they were being told that she was in that Pathfinder with them after the murders. She then breaks down crying and apologizes, saying it was probably just the hormones and that she was doing her best to remember. Finally, they ask her who she thinks would be most likely to kill the girls, and she says Mike Scott. After they finally let her go, the 2 detectives would briefly discuss if they were perhaps too hard on her. Hardesty says, quote, "I think she's holding back on something, but I don't know what," end quote. Laura then says that he hates to be too tough on her, and Hardesty chimes in saying, quote, "If she fucking starts bleeding in here, that's our ass," end quote. And Laura says that he's turning off the recording device. Laura would maintain that they weren't too rough on her, that she was simply upset because she realized that her ex-boyfriend was a cold, hard murderer. Investigators then interview Forrest again, who gives them nothing new or helpful. But their next interview yielded much better results. On Thursday, September 9th at 9:15 a.m., Mike Scott was officially interrogated by investigators. Mike tells investigators that him and Rob aren't friends anymore because Rob had actually stolen a pair of Metallica tickets from him. Mike also tells police that he believes that Maurice had gotten the .22 pistol off of some kids that were selling him drugs. But he also says that he hopes he's not lying to them. At the beginning of his interrogation, Mike would tell investigators that he didn't know anything. But by 7:04 p.m., he would call his wife Janine to say, quote, "Dear, I know more about the case than I thought I knew," end quote. John Jones would later discuss his theory about the way that the investigation was being handled at this point. He states that Johnson's team was relying on the pyramid theory of investigation. He describes this by saying that you start with a confession and build everything in the case around that confession. And if the evidence doesn't support that confession, well, you figure out a way to make it support it. Let's dig deeper into Mike's interrogation with the police. Throughout Mike's interrogation, he would go from apologizing about his terrible memory, but insisting he knew nothing and certainly wasn't involved, to thinking that maybe he was. That maybe Maurice didn't pick him up in the Pathfinder on Saturday night, but maybe it was Friday because that's when the murders happened. Throughout this entire time, Mike repeats time and time again that he could just be making all of this up and that he doesn't really remember. At a certain point, he becomes agitated and the police tell him that he's free to go, but instead of leaving, he just takes a break to smoke a cigarette. On this break, he was talking to one of the detectives, and he tells him, "If I knew who killed the girls, I would happily tell you because I think what happened to them is wrong." Pretty quickly, when Mike gets back into the room, things heat up, and detectives tell him that they know that he did it, and if he doesn't tell them right now, they can guarantee that he will get the death penalty. But if he confesses, they can help him out. About 3 hours into the interview, Mike agrees to take a polygraph test, and the operator does come into the room. He sets up the machine, and he asks Mike some questions, but for whatever reason, the actual test was never performed. When they ask Mike how much money was taken from the register, which remember was over $500, Mike says maybe $12, maybe $14. But by 1:43 p.m., it appears that Mike's memory is just somehow coming back to him. He says that on the day of the murders, they all went in and bought yogurt, and that Maurice and Forrest were casing the place, but he wasn't. They would all drive back to the shop later where he saw that the back metal door was open. Maurice and Forrest went in while Mike stayed in the car. Mike hears no gunshots and only remembers Maurice and Forrest running back into the car and telling him to drive. A few more hours go by and Mike takes another break. After this break, the police say, hey, it's pretty hard to believe that if the back door was open, you didn't hear a single gunshot. And Mike says, oh, well, maybe I did hear gunshots. A few more hours go by, and Mike says maybe he was more involved with the murders than he remembers. So the police jump on this, and they start asking for specifics, like what were the girls tied up with? And at first, Mike says it was Venetian blind cords. The police say, nope, try again, and then he says napkins? Wrong again. And Mike asks them, maybe it was an electrical cord? At this point, he's not telling them these things, he's asking them these things. He continues to tell investigators that he's not sure if it's real or not, but he can see it all playing out in his head. Rob made him shoot one of the girls, saying that if he didn't, he would be shot himself. So Mike starts crying and shoots one of the girls. He also states that the fire was started by them placing napkins and foam cups on the girls' bodies, and they used a lighter to start it. He again reiterates to police that he doesn't remember any of this, he's just seeing it in his head. At 5:35 p.m., he does ask for a lawyer, and he says that he wants to go home, but the investigators tell him maybe it's just time for another break, and if after the break you still want a lawyer, that's no problem. So Mike takes this break, and when he gets back, he's like, yeah, I think I should probably get a lawyer. And the police are like, no problem, you can totally do that, but would you be willing to talk to just one more person first? And Mike agrees. This is when we meet Robert Merrill. Merrill had been on the force for 19 years and worked with none other than Mr. Hector Polanco. And like El Diablo himself, he gets a confession. Mike does essentially repeat his entire story again, but they develop it a bit more. They get more specific. Around 10 p.m., Mike insists that he should probably go home since it's been like 13 hours at this point. The investigators are like, fine, no problem, but can you come back in the morning? And Mike agrees. Mike gets back to the station the next day at about 10:30 in the morning, and he says like, hey guys, I'm not sure how that all happened last night, but again, I don't remember doing any of the things that I told you I did the night before. This obviously did not sit well with the investigators, and they ask him what he means. And at this point, Mike starts telling the story again, but he's adding things and he's changing things, and this really irritates Robert Merrill. At one point, Merrill ends up taking out that .22 pistol that they took from Maurice back in 1991, and he shows it to Mike, asking if he remembers the gun. But when Mike's not sure, things start to escalate really quickly, and Merrill literally puts the gun to Mike's head. This is something that Merrill would deny in court, but the video evidence is pretty tough to contest. Just like the day prior, Mike folds. Okay, what you guys are telling me must have happened. I might not remember it, but I guess it happened. If you've been a listener of mine for pretty much any amount of time, you probably know how much I love real audio. So I am going to play you 3 clips from Mike's interrogation so you can see this transition and judge for yourself. In the very last clip, you will hear the detective ask Mike about the gun, and in the video, you can see him show him the gun and then put it to his head. This video, as well as every video used for these episodes, will be in the resources section for this case on voicesforjusticepodcast.com. But here are the clips.
You want the truth, and you know what the truth is. You're having trouble with the memories or flashbacks. You know what happened. You're scared to tell us. I don't blame you. It's a horrible thing what you saw in there.
Look, can I tell y'all what I keep seeing in my head?
Tell us what you see in your head.
I keep seeing these girls get shot.
Right. Tell us what that looks like. Tell us what you see specifically. How they're getting shot and who's shooting them. Come on, Mike, you're doing good. Tell us. Let's do this today. Let's do it.
Seeing girls, I remember seeing them down. I remember one girl screaming, terrified.
Okay.
I don't know if this is real or not, or if this is...
Michael, it's real. It's okay. You can present it to us any way you want. It's real. Mike, look at me. You're remembering what happened because you were inside there, right? You're remembering what happened.
I don't honestly remember going in the building.
But you were in the building. You went in there with me. I don't believe that, Michael. You do remember going in there. And you know you were in there. Did you shoot any of those girls?
No, sir.
Then tell us what happened. What did those 2 boys do to those girls? You want to live with this the rest of your life?
No, I don't.
Then get it out right now. They're you over. They're the ones that shot the girls. Do it. What did you see happen?
At some point, Maurice hands you that revolver. What does he say to you?
Either shoot him or you're next.
That's what he said.
Because I didn't want to do it.
Right. Either shoot him or you're next. What do you remember hearing then?
I remember looking at this girl. I cry. I hear Robert saying, do it, do it. I hear the gun go off. I only pulled the trigger once. I turn around. Here's your stupid gun.
What happens next, Mike? That brought back some memories, didn't it?
I remember looking at the gun.
You ever seen that gun before?
I'm not positive.
Does that look like a gun you've seen before?
It looks like a gun I've seen before, but I'm not positive.
Is that the gun you shot somebody with, Mike?
I don't.
Is that the gun you walked up behind somebody with and shot in the head? Is that the one? Talk to me, Mike.
Yes, sir.
You did that, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
We've just opened some more doors, haven't we, Mike?
Not really.
You sure?
Yes, sir.
After speaking with Mike, they bring in Rob Springsteen, who, like Mike, started off proclaiming his innocence, but by the end, he does give a confession. For Rob, I was only able to salvage one clip where he tells the investigators that he's innocent.
The problem is, we got to get
what are our options?
Our options
I cannot give you any more truth than I've already given. Where do we go from here?
Why can't you? Because you're going to dig yourself into that thing? Well, you're already there. You've already dug the hole. The hole's there.
Oh, that I'm in it. I don't know. That's what I keep telling you guys. I mean, my God, this was 7 years ago.
But this is one of the most significant things that ever happened in your life.
That's what I keep trying to explain to you. If I was there and I partook in this, I would remember these things.
And you do remember these things.
No, I don't. No, I do not.
You're the coldest guy I've ever talked to in my life. Are you a cold-blooded murderer?
No, sir, I'm not.
I think you are. I think Maurice is absolutely true about you.
Well, then
you're the coldest guy I've ever talked to. Pardon me?
Then let's take whatever actions we need to take. If that's what you believe and that's where you think this case needs to go, then let's go there.
We don't want to go there.
But I'm doing everything I can and have exceeded my limits of helping you guys. Where do we go now?
There are more clips available, but without being able to read the captions, it's pretty difficult to make out what they're saying, so I'm just going to summarize it for you here. After Rob tells investigators that he's innocent, somewhere along the way, he starts to change his tune. In the video I found, they ask Rob, "What did Maurice make you do with the 380? What did he tell you to do?" And with his head down, he says shoot her in the back of the head. He asks which one, and he says he doesn't know. They ask him where he shot her, and he actually puts his index finger on the investigator's shoulder, which, as a quick reminder, all 4 girls were shot in their heads, nowhere else. The investigator kind of just goes right over this and just continues to ask where, and Rob says Maurice wanted him to shoot her in the back of the head, but he didn't want to shoot her. They then ask, was she already down? What happened? Just say it. Answer it, Rob. What else did you do? And Rob says he doesn't know. But the investigators do what they do, and they continue to press him, saying, yeah, you do. And then the investigator says, quote, she wasn't dead yet, was she? End quote. He's referring to Amy Ayers, who was the only girl shot with the 380 and the only girl to be shot twice. The audio is so bad at this point that I can't tell if Rob even answered the question about Amy not being dead after she was shot. This would later be a problem in court because the police would actually have to tell the jury what they say happened versus them being able to hear it clearly on the audio. But the investigators go on to say, quote, and warning here, it's pretty graphic language, but it's true to the story. You fucking know you fucking raped her. Just say it. End quote. And Rob seems pretty agitated and finally says, quote, I stuck my dick in her pussy and I raped her. End quote. On October 6, 1999, Mike, Rob, Maurice, and Forrest are arrested for the yogurt shop murders. People in the community were shocked. They couldn't figure out why these kids would do this. The principal of McCallum High School would even come out and express disbelief that the kids would even be able to keep a secret for that long. On November 29, 1999, there was a hearing where Robert Merrill gave testimony about the series of events that the state would be presenting to the court. He said that Maurice came up with the idea. Maurice bought the yogurt while Mike and Rob went to the back room and propped open the door. Then they all went to the mall and waited for the store to close. Forrest stayed in the car as the lookout. Rob and Mike had the girls get undressed and tied them up with their clothing while Maurice went to the register. Maurice then quickly became angry because there wasn't a lot of money. He asked the girl wearing a yogurt shop polo where the rest of the money was, and she told him that that was it, so he shot her. He then asked the other girl in the yogurt shop polo the same question, and she gave him the same response, so he killed her too. Maurice tells Rob to rape one of the girls and tells Mike to do the same, but Mike couldn't perform, so he tells her to kill her instead. Mike then shoots Amy and Maurice shoots her again. They then piled up the bodies, set them on fire, and left out of the back door. It's important to note here that when the case did proceed to trial, the testimony about the last two people in the shop, those people in the hooded jackets, was totally eliminated and they weren't able to use it. Also, instead of using the original report from arson investigator Melvin Stahl, they would be allowed to present a completely different theory about how the fire originated. Although Stahl initially believed that the fire had originated on that metal shelving unit and that the girls were actually burned from radiant heat, he would now state that after revisiting the case via pictures and seeing Littleton's new findings, he agrees that the fire started on the girls' bodies. Just like Mike said in his confession. Just like John Jones alluded to when speaking about his theory that they were reshaping evidence to fit the confessions they obtained. Ultimately, largely in part because Maurice and Forrest never confessed, they would never be charged with anything related to the murders. After being extradited from West Virginia to Texas on May 30th, 2001, Rob Springsteen would be sentenced to death. But because he was a minor at the time of the murders, that would be changed to life in prison. On September 22, 2002, Michael Scott was sentenced to life in prison after the jury couldn't unanimously agree on giving him a death sentence. In 2006, Rob's conviction was overturned by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals when they ruled that Mike Scott's confession had been used inappropriately against him, and that it was in violation of his Sixth Amendment right to cross-examine witnesses. About a year later, on June 6, 2007, the same court would overturn Mike Scott's conviction, citing the same reasoning. This didn't mean that Mike and Rob were off scot-free, though. The cases were being prepared for a retrial. During this time, the defense lawyers asked for the DNA found on the girls to be retested, because at this point it had been over 15 years since the initial testing, and as you all probably know, there were a lot of advances in DNA during that time. The test determined that the DNA found on Amy Ayers and Jennifer Harbison belonged to one man. The DNA found on the clothing used to tie up Eliza belonged to another man, and the other set of DNA from Jennifer Harbison came from a third man, most likely her boyfriend. But ultimately, they determined that none of the DNA matched Mike, Rob, Maurice, or Forrest. It would take another few years, but by the end of 2009, all charges against Mike and Rob were dropped. Unfortunately, because their cases were essentially voided versus them being deemed innocent, they wouldn't be eligible for compensation offered to those that are wrongfully convicted in the state of Texas. Rob would file a few lawsuits trying to fight this, but he wouldn't receive anything for the time he served. As more officials in the Austin Police Department were assigned to the case, what happened to Amy, Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza would continue to evolve. Maybe they weren't all bound. They appeared to have been face down when they were shot. Jennifer's body was in an unnatural position. Perhaps it shifted that way as items from the metal shelving unit fell on her. And some more graphic items that I'm just uncomfortable getting into and don't find particularly important to the case. The parents of the girls were obviously devastated and upset by the convictions and eventual reversals. And who would blame them? The absolute horror that would be sitting through hearing such graphic details about the way that your child died to only have it be pretty much for nothing had to have been just unimaginable. And despite Maurice and Forrest never being convicted and Mike and Rob being released, Barbara Harbison still believes that they are the true perpetrators in this case.
I believe that the people that they arrested are the right people, even though they're out, they're not in jail, that we will be blessed with an answer. And it may not even come until I'm gone. But like I said, it won't affect me either way because my children are gone and they're not coming back to me. I have memories of them and that's what I hang on to.
So what do you want people to know about Barbara today?
That I'm well. You know, that God's blessed me and He's given me 7 grandchildren and I'm good. I'm really, really good. Jennifer and Sarah are always with me and I think that I've made the best of the worst situation. I think. You know, I may be wrong, but I think I've made the best of the worst situation.
Like I mentioned way back in the beginning of part 1, I truly believe that there is hope in this case. And that isn't just because I am endlessly hopeful for these cases, which I absolutely am, but it's also because in 2017, the Austin Police Department entered that single strand of DNA gathered from Amy Ayer's body into a database. And they found a match. It was actually entered into the Public University of Central Florida Research Database. This is a YSTR strand, which is male only, and it'll only tell you basically the lineage of that male, so it'll come up with a ton of fathers, uncles, cousins, and whatnot. But it's something huge that they've never had in this case before that could help them solve it. But the problem is, the FBI is refusing to release the familial lineage to the Austin PD to further investigate. The FBI states that this is for privacy reasons. It's a private database where donors are promised to remain anonymous. Further, federal law prevents these samples from being traced to individuals. But, like I said, I still think that there is hope. The Austin PD is fighting for this DNA, and so are the families. I don't know much about overturning federal laws like this, so if you do, definitely let me know on social media because I would love to know what the chances are of getting that overturned. But in addition, I think that it's great because you never know when they'll get another match in another database. If they matched once, it's possible that they'll match again. And the families aren't giving up just yet. A few years ago, Amy Ayer's parents told reporters that as long as they are still alive, they would still fight for Amy and the girls. The closest thing that families have gotten to justice at this point is their lawsuit against Bryce Foods, the company that owned the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop chain. They were awarded $12 million, but I'm sure each and every one of them would trade that money in for answers about their children. Which brings me to our call to action. In my research for this case, I was actually able to find a call to action directly from one of the families. This comes from Amy's brother Sean and his wife.
You know, we're a family that doesn't give up, and we will continue to annoy, irritate, call, text, email the DA's office, the police station, till something happens. And we would like the public, if they know any information, if you don't think it's worth anything, just call. And you can call the Austin Cold Case, Homicide Unit. His name is Ron Lara. You can call him and tell him what you know, even if you think it's nothing.
We are still interviewing people. We still get tips on this case. And I think that's a good, important thing to remember that, with a case like this, we believe there's someone out there who could know something that could be helpful and could be helpful for this investigation.
Like I said before, I really do think that there is a lot of hope in this case. And there's also a lot of loose ends, even today. Who was this crazy person that was harassing Jennifer Harbison and the yogurt shop manager? Could Kenneth McDuff have been involved, or maybe the Mexican nationals? Also, what about the owner of the party store, Mr. Jorge Barney, the guy who was on the other side of the wall when the shots were fired, the guy who had access to the crawl space that connects the stores? Remember, manager Reese Price said that she saw male footprints on the toilet and the tile above it moved. Could Jorge Barney have used the crawl space to escape after committing the murders? I think it's possible. It's also possible, though in my opinion pretty improbable, that one or more of the 4 boys were involved in the murders as well. To be totally honest, I am really torn here. It hurts my heart to not be able to fully side with the parents of the victims when they say that they believe that Mike, Rob, Forrest, and Maurice killed their daughters. At the end of the day, none of us know what happened to Sarah, Eliza, Amy, and Jennifer. But there were 50 confessions in this case, and ultimately, the courts voided Mike and Rob's sentences due to their confessions and DNA evidence. So whether or not they did commit this crime, they were cleared of it, and I think that needs to be discussed. We also discussed a lot of crazy interrogation techniques, from the pregnant woman to Hector Polanco being this iconic figure who could just rip the truth out of your heart, who would later be known as this guy who got all of these false confessions. It's just a huge topic in this case that I really think needs to be addressed. And since I am by no means an expert on the subject of false confessions or wrongful convictions, I reached out to the most knowledgeable person I know on these subjects, Maggie Freeling. Maggie has been a journalist for 10 years. You might remember her from the documentary The Disappearance of Maura Murray. But she also hosts the Unjust and Unsolved podcast, as well as the Suave podcast, both of which are about these very topics. She has spent years speaking to exonerees and going over evidence in a variety of wrongful conviction cases. So here is me and Maggie discussing false confessions, wrongful convictions, and how we can hopefully improve in the future.
The tactics, I mean, that's certainly one of them. But then, the one that I see the most is keeping them in there for so long, threatening. I mean, in the yogurt shop murders, I mean, it was very clear that Scott was threatened. I mean, he put a gun to his head. I mean, I can't imagine, being a young person. I mean, I know they were in their 20s, but, again, they're not you or me with some sort of higher education who knows all these things. Being in your 20s with a gun to your head by a cop saying, I know you did this, confess. 12 hours in an interrogation room. I mean, the leading causes of wrongful convictions, and this is from the Innocence Project: real or perceived intimidation by law enforcement. We have that. Use of force by law enforcement. I would say a gun to the head is a use of force. Compromised reasoning ability due to exhaustion, stress, hunger, substance use, mental limitations, limited education, devious interrogation techniques, saying things like, well, your friend's in the next room confessing. I mean, police are allowed to lie to you. And fear, they usually threaten them. If you don't confess and we get you for this, you're getting the death penalty. Just confess and we'll give you 30 years instead of death. Do you want to die? It is, to me, I can see how somebody would falsely confess to just say, I just got to get out of here. Exactly like you said. I just got to get out of here. I've been in here 12 hours. I'm hungry. I'm tired. I'll fix it later.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and honestly, like Michael Scott's confession is so sad, and it's over multiple days. You know what I mean? They're like, come back the next day. Like it's so intense and so insane to me, and it's just tragic because he says multiple times, I don't remember any of this. You know what I mean? He comes back the next day and he says, I think I might have lied to you guys. Like, I don't know what happened in my head. I don't remember any of this. I'm not sure that I did it. And they're like, no, you did it. This is real. And it's so sad because there's so many points in which he kind of comes to grips with reality about like, wait, I didn't do this. And just, again, he repeats it again. I don't know if this is real or not. I don't know if this is real or not. And, one question I wanted to ask you is, how does something like this even make it to court? Like they only looked at it a few years later and decided like, whoa, that was definitely a coerced confession. How does it make it to court in the first place? I don't get it.
Because police are allowed to do these things. There's nothing that says that they can't. So that's the problem. The problem is that it is so easy to convict because this is allowed. I mean, unless there was something like clearly egregious, which I do think the gun to the head was. But I mean, unless it's like so obvious that they're beating him and, something like that. I mean, unfortunately, at least back in the 90s, again, I hope we have different standards today. This was okay. They can lie. They could do these things. They can hold you for hours. You're a suspect in a murder conviction. I mean, the courts are on the cop's side in this sense. And that's the hardest part. It is so easy to convict. He confessed. Why would he confess to something he didn't do? Obviously, we know now, but back then, I mean, juries didn't really know that. And then once you're convicted, it is so hard to overturn. It is so hard to overturn. These guys got lucky because the DNA did it for them. But there's so many cases that doesn't really happen. I ask the same thing though. How does this make it to court? Because to me, it's just so obvious that it shouldn't, but it does.
So one of the things I did want to ask you is, how can we prevent this in the future? How can we be better at this and not have this happen all the time?
Well, prosecutors are elected. So, I didn't really know this until I started doing the work, but you elect them. I mean, here in Manhattan, Cy Vance is up for election, and there are a number of wrongful convictions that have been waiting on him to look at the cases. So, when we're looking at voting, you can vote in these prosecutors, the district attorney, and then they, it's under their office. So the district attorney is elected, and you look at people who are more progressive and are looking at starting conviction integrity units, conviction review units. Absolutely look at your local county and see, who is up for election. We're entering an election season right now. So that is the first way to start this, is by electing people who want to make change and want conviction review units and want to first undo the wrong that's been done and then prevent it from happening. Enact legislation to make sure that there has to be recordings, to make sure that, police can't, put forward false evidence to get somebody to confess. These are all things that we can change with voting.
If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this series. Although this is 3 episodes long, there is so much more that I didn't include here for time's sake. So if you are interested in learning more about this case, I definitely have to recommend reading Who Killed These Girls by Beverly Lowry, which is where I got a ton of information for this series. I also have to extend a huge thank you to Maggie Freeling for coming on the show to lend her expertise. Please go subscribe to her podcast Suave and Unjust and Unsolved. She is doing amazing things in the space, and I hope you will all take a moment to support her in that. And if you did not get enough of Maggie Freeling in this episode, because you can literally never have enough of Maggie Freeling, our full interview and video will be available over on the Voices for Justice Patreon. Which, if you haven't seen, I do put out bonus minisodes every single month, and we do cool things like Netflix watch parties, and this starts at just $5 a month. It's a great way to get some bonus content and support the show. Right now, I'm actually trying to save up for a billboard for one of our cases. So if you want to be a part of that, visit patreon.com/voicesforjustice. I will also have it linked in the show notes. But this would not be Voices for Justice without ending on our call to action and our victims. So although you heard it directly from the family of Amy Ayers, please don't forget to take a moment and share this story. We just saw a huge break in the Kristen Smart case from 1996 this month. There's absolutely no reason we shouldn't have the same hope for Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. But as always, thank you, I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Voices for Justice is hosted and produced by me, Sarah Turney. For more information about the podcast, to suggest a case, to see resources used for this episode, and to find out more about how to help the cases I discuss, visit voicesforjusticepodcast.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show in your podcast player. It really does help more people find the podcast and these cases in need of justice.